Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is story about what if Naruto Uzumaki resolves to become the most powerful ninja being alive. Part 1. Before I start, please do support for more amazing content and comments for part 2. Do consider to subscribe my channel and share my video to your friends and check out the description as well. Let's start the video. Rain pounded the pavement as dark clouds loomed overcast, promising more still to come. In a respectable part of the hidden village of Konohagakure, many people were running along the streets, desperate to get inside and stay dry and warm, while people who had thought to bring umbrellas went at a slower pace. Slowly but steadily, the onslaught of water began to increase until the intensity of its splattering was enough to cause pain to some, and the sound it made on the cement only echoed its awesome fury. However, some chose to remain outside, not out of intent for philosophical meandering in a strange yet calming environment, but for more sinister purposes. In a nearby back alley, raindrops were dripping off of a small group of such people as they took turns beating up a 5-year-old boy who could easily stand out in a crow by his sunshine gold hair, bright blue eyes and 3 whisker marks adorning each cheek. For them, the rain was nothing more than a nuisance, a minor irritant that took no precedence in comparison to the duty that they were fulfilling, to purify the town by purging it of its demonic influence. The boy understood none of this except for the pain, the ebb and flow of nerve signals searing his mind as he drifted between consciousness and unconsciousness. For him, the rain was something of benefit as it washed away the blood and dirt that was covering his body and cooled down the searing white fire that he could feel throughout his whole body. The blonde-haired boy didn't know why this was occurring to him. He had heard something about a festival going on and so he had left the orphanage to come and participate. Little did he realize that it would also be his undoing. As soon as he made it to the outskirts of where the festival was to take place, one of the people who were currently beating on him saw him and a large group of people turned on him and chased him. He had tried to escape but ran into a dead end. With no way out, he had accepted the beatings that came. He was often treated to punches and kicks at the orphanage, but then 3 people came up with weapons. One man broke open a bottle to leave the top section that he held onto with jagged edges. A ninja had remembered his kunai, while a third person got inventive and took the metal lid off of a nearby garbage can. It was when he felt the shinobi stab him in his forearm that he came to the startling, horrifying conclusion. They were trying to kill him. However, they were not even going to let him off that easily as they hesitated at a direct one-hit kill, instead going through the motions of trying to torture him to death. Believing that his death was near, he finally began to cry. He had not done at the orphanage once he realized that the matrons who beat him would only become enraged and beat him even harder, but here, nobody could distinguish his tears from the rain, nobody could hear his sobs over their own violent chants of bloodlust in the rain, and any movements from his sobs would be chalked up to involuntary convulsions from the pain. So, this is how it ends, he thought. Life hadn't done anything for him. Even though he had just today turned 5, he could remember only a few happy memories of Raymond and his grandpa in spirit, the third Hokage, who he had sometimes encountered on the streets and talked to. He would miss his Ajiji and the kind young girl and old man who managed the raiment stand he always went to, but even his affection for the 3 were not enough to hold the frayed threads that barely held him to life. He knew most children didn't remember anything from before the age of 4, but he remembered all too well agony tended to imprint itself upon your mind after a while, and the one time he was nearly burned alive was something that would not fade away, causing him to often have fits in his sleep. What surprised him, however, was how much pain he had been tolerating up to this point. Usually he would have passed out long ago, unable to handle the frenzy of electric signals from his nerves to his brain as they worked overtime, but this time he wasn't. Unknown even to Naruto, a primal rage had been building up in his system, hidden from him only because it was still dwarfed by his suffering. The rage kept him barely awake, but more importantly, it awoke something else entirely. Deep inside Naruto there was contained a great beast who after 5 years of insanity had finally been affected by the strong emotions of its container, and it too began to stay awake, witnessing in horror at what its vessel was going through. And then just as suddenly as the crowd had started to beat him up had it stopped. They did not do it out of any goodwill towards the boy, but because of the weasel mask Anbu standing in front of them, projecting killer intent strong enough to cause some to pass out and force many more to their knees. "What are you fools doing?" The yell was controlled through clenched teeth, but the righteous anger behind it was enough to scare those who had hitherto only felt relatively minor effects. The Anbu stared at the ninja and the crowd long enough, trying to pick out a name from the back of his head, before muttering, "Riku, if you don't have your hit IA turned into the Hokage's office by tomorrow morning, I will hunt you out and I will kill you." Making sure that the Chunin understood that wasn't a passive threat, he shook his head, his anger still washing over the crowd, mingling with the rain. He would have loved to take every last one of them to see Ibiki, but the life of the boy behind him took precedence. Turning around, he picked up the now unconscious Naruto, whispered in his ear, "It's okay, Naruto," and immediately shunched into the Anbu medical room. While he knew that there were a few people at the regular hospitals who wouldn't hesitate to help Naruto, he didn't wish to waste the time that it would take to find the diamond in the rough there. Naruto woke up standing. That was the first thing he noticed before he managed to take in his surroundings. As if those bad men beating him up weren't enough, they threw him into the sewers. He blinked before looking at his arms and realizing they were in perfect shape. He could have sworn that somebody had stabbed him not 5 minutes ago, in addition to the bruises and cuts delivered by all the others. Looking down, he saw that he was ankle-deep in grimy water, yet at the same time there was no feeling of wetness to the slime. His apparent lack of wounds, contrary to his beating, didn't hold his attention for long, though, looking around some more, he was intrigued by the pipes that led along the sewers. Every half second or so, they were pulsating to a steady beat, some of them with red, most of them blue. The blue pipes gave off a feeling of calm to him, but it was the red pipes that caught his attention, as the red pipes had a single linear pipe, while the blue branched off in many directions of the sewers. Throwing caution to the winds, he followed the path given by the red pipes, his natural curiosity pushing him forward. It was a short trek. 5 minutes later, he stopped before great steel double doors. A feeling of finality hung over him, as if a turning point existed beyond that door. It was now or never for Naruto. Gathering up the courage to do so, he pushed open the doors. The room that awaited him didn't disappoint. Unlike the cold, cramped tunnels that made up a sewer, what awaited him was a giant hall with an expanse going on for as far as he could see, with pitch blackness blocking off sight of the other end of the room. Most interestingly was a line of iron bars that went from the ground to the ceiling, perhaps a cage, effectively blocking him off from going past the first 40 feet of the area. Solidifying the notion of the bars making up a cage was a door in the center of it, a small piece of paper melded to the door, and the next nearest bar kept it from opening. Naruto looked a bit closer, spotting a kanji that he couldn't read on the piece of paper. "So, my jailer finally visits me." Naruto jumped back in sudden fright. To him, a voice meant a person, and a person meant someone more who might beat him up, bars and door or not. Where the pitch blackness kept him from seeing past the bars, a red glow started to illuminate a figure. A giant figure, in fact, going up perhaps 40 stories. Stumbling back from the sight and nearly tripping, several features began to take up his attention. Most notable were the 9 tails swishing on the backside of the beast. Looking upwards, he saw an elongated head with a snout and whiskers and ears poking out from the top of its head as opposed to its head, which brought him the conclusion that this some sort of canine. Surveying the giant before him again, he thought it seemed to be a fox. A fox. Damn fox. Why won't you die, you stupid fox? There it is. Kill the fox. Could this be the fox all those people were talking about? Naruto shook his head, trying to clear his thoughts of all the negative emotions that were constantly directed at him, and looked back up at the giant fox. For its part, the fox merely waited for the look of thought on Naruto's face to pass before speaking up again. "I see you are curious about what I am doing here, are you not?" A small nod signified a yes. "Listen up, Gaki, first thing is first. What is your name?" Naruto hesitated. On the few occasions he met someone he didn't hate, they would eventually ask for his name. When he gave it, the look on their faces would inevitably turn into a scowl, or even worse, a malicious grin that promised pain. As such, he didn't wish to give out his name, but in this particular situation, it somehow seemed almost right to give it. You Uzumaki and Naruto, sir." The fox frowned at Naruto's stutter. It then occurred to him that he was probably being overwhelmed by his own presence. With a subtle shift of the aura that he gave off, the boy began to calm down. But something still seemed off to him about his speech patterns. "Well then, I do not really give out my name to many, but you ninjas know me best as Kyuubi no Kitsune." Now, Naruto may have been isolated from the rest of Konoha society, but even he managed to pick up some customs and history. In fact, earlier that day the matron at the orphanage had mentioned that the festival was the celebration of the death of the Kyuubi after its attack against Konoha, while glaring at him all the while, and she had recommended to him personally that he go. Now that he thought about it, perhaps she was trying to get him beat up. So to see a giant fox claim that he was the Kyuubi no Kitsune was a bit shocking for him, which reflected itself on his face. Kyuubi, you're dead." Being put off at the lack of any eloquency to Naruto's broken speech, Kyuubi took this moment to break any misconceptions. "Most likely they merely told you that to cover up the truth. In reality, under normal circumstances only a demon or a celestial agent can kill a Bijuu, especially me, the 9-tailed fox. One can only seal us away into objects. Up to the 4th-tailed Bijuu, that might be possible, however, from there on we simply possess far too much power to seal away into inanimate objects. Instead, we can only be sealed into humans." He paused there for a while, allowing Naruto just enough time to absorb the newfound information, but not enough for him to reflect on the implications. However, even then there is a problem in doing so. Demonic chakra, or yokai, is a foreign agent to the human body. It corrupts. Even a small amount is enough to kill a large man. The only way to get around this is to find a body not grown enough to reject the yokai, so that it will grow while being used to and accepting the yokai. In other words, it has to be an infant not more than a few weeks old, and in my case, I was sealed into a child born the same day. A few seconds passed as a series of looks passed on the child's face, which had been blank up until the last few sentences. It was at this point that it began to dawn on the fox that the boy before him hadn't understood the first half of his speech at all. Concentration on keenly listening to the Kyuubi's words passed into thoughtful pondering, then quickly metamorphed into revelation, before finally changing into horror. The fox had to recoil at that last expression. That is right, Gaki. I, the Kyuubi no Kitsune, am sealed into you, Uzumaki Naruto. Itachi stood guard over the young boy who was sleeping peacefully in the gurney. Naruto had had a few fits when first brought in, but had since relaxed, but for his fists clenched tightly holding the bedsheets, the bright teal color only serving to echo the aura of sterilization a hospital room always had around him. When he had first brought Naruto into the Anbu compound, his wounds had already been healing, and one of the medics on duty helped accelerate the process. Physically, he was almost completely in perfect shape, aside from malnutrition, but it was his mental condition that Itachi was worried about. Apparently he had gone into shock during his beating from loss of blood and pain, something that was unfathomable for anybody with a Biju-reinforced ability to hang on to life, only hammering in how horrifying the situation must have been. He had since slipped out of shock, but instead went straight into a coma. The medic reassured him that it was a light coma, so he should be coming out of it soon. The stoic-faced Anbu just stood there looking outside the window, with several different tangents of thoughts running through his head. He grimaced and put back on his weasel mask to hide the emotions that were beginning to crack his own personal mask. Picking out one line of thinking, he realized he was angry at the village itself. While he was as loyal to Konoha as one could be, he could not help but wonder what the point was when the people who resided in it were scum that would beat up a helpless 5-year-old boy. Snapping out of a mindset that could only lead to treacherous desires, he craned his head to look back at the fair-haired boy, still retaining anger at the villagers and shinobi. How could they not realize the boy was not the demon, but only its container? Had it not occurred to him that if he were the demon reincarnated, they would have been dead within seconds of laying their dirty fingers on him? At times like this, Itachi was surprised that he hadn't yet snapped and slaughtered any of the mobs that he had to rescue Naruto from, and it impressed him even more that Naruto had not tried fighting back, considering he was the target of all those mobs. An involuntary shudder caught Itachi by surprise, as he realized that if Naruto ever became a ninja and wasn't being actively sabotaged along the way by whoever taught him, his unbreakable spirit would probably allow him to become one of the greatest shinobi to ever walk amongst the elemental nations. The opening of the door caught Itachi's attention, his eyes narrowing as he recognized the chakra signature before the visitor walked in. Standing there in robes denoting his position was the Sandaime Hokage, coming to check on Naruto. The third looked at the Jinchuriki briefly before looking up at Itachi. Itachi stared back at him. Sarutobi didn't need to see anything beyond Itachi's onyx eyes to know that an argument was going to come up again over allowing Itachi to train Naruto in the basics of stealth and chakra control. Naruto was shocked by this revelation. So that was why the villagers hated him so. Anger boiled his blood once again. The villagers treated him miserably because of his prisoner, ignoring that he was only the prison. That the fox was a separate presence in his mind talking to him only proved this point. Naruto suddenly realized he was letting his emotions getting the best of him, so he took a deep breath, calmed himself, and then gave a short bout to the great beast before him. Even if what the Kyuubi said was true and he was unable to touch Naruto, it still would not do to piss off the 9-tailed demon fox, and keeping him on his good side was best. Copying the mannerisms that he had seen of some shinobi in the presence of the Hokage, he kept his bow and stated thank you, Kyuubi Dono. It was the first sentence that he had managed to get out without butchering its form. Hopefully that show of respect would appease the giant vulpine. He didn't cry, however. Crying would only show weakness, and it wasn't as if he hadn't already been dealt a bad hand in life. The Kyuubi looked at the small boy bowing before him. He thought about the situation that he was currently in as a result of his being sealed 5 years ago. While he would much rather be free again, he knew that this wouldn't occur unless his container willingly undid the seal that bound the two together, which would kill the boy in the process, so he threw that thought process out. If he died, he died. He hadn't been to hell for a while, but it would be nice to catch up with old friends there, as much of friends as demons can be with each other, for a while, before breaking free into the mortal realm after a couple of centuries of regaining power. To be fairly honest, he was bored of random mass destruction. Perhaps seeing the world from the eyes of a human would provide a stimulating experience. Yes, he thought. He was one of the 9 great-tailed demons, the greatest of them all. Perhaps he could recoup something out of this as well. He recalled visiting the human that fool Hachibi had gotten sealed into a year before he himself got sealed away. That experience had been interesting, to say the least. He had taken to remembering some of the self-dubbed Killer Bee's rhymes so that he could use them to annoy other demons when he met up with them again, but Hachibi's vessel was also a competent ninja. A very competent ninja at that. It was said that he was the third strongest ninja in Kumagakure at the time, next to his own brother and the then Reikage. If Hachibi could create such a figurative monster, why couldn't he? It was right then and there that the king of Kitsunes decided that he would train his vessel from now on. He would nudge his vessel to partaking in the shinobi ways if he wasn't already so inclined and see to it that this young boy known as Uzumaki Naruto would become a feared and respected name. With luck, he might even become the strongest man to walk the lands. That would be an ego booster. But the Kyuubi wasn't doing this solely for a matter of his own pride. He had taken a glance through some of the boy's memories where he could. The nine-tailed fox wasn't truly evil, but he wasn't really good either. He just did whatever the hell he felt like, and usually that leaned towards destroying stuff. But he also had his own code of honor, much like every demon did, and the horrifying acts that he saw being committed to his vessel sparked a twinge of guilt in him. He was the cause of this boy's misery, and damn if he wouldn't at least make up for it somewhat. A demon would never kill a demon child under any circumstance, owing to the rarity of offsprings amongst demonkind. While his vessel was hardly a demon, to him the point stood, more so than the human children he slaughtered during his rampage. And lastly, he had realized that the brat was the son of the Yondaime Hokage, even if the boy didn't know it himself. Although he hated the man, he also respected him for sacrificing himself to save his village and condemning himself to the Shinigami's stomach for eternity. For a demon, respect runs deeper than hatred, so while he was along for the ride, hopefully he would see the 5-year-old Jinchuriki exhibit the same traits that had made his father an exemplary example of man. He made his decision right there and then. So tell me, Gaki, now that you know I am here, what next? Kyuubi prompted, hoping to lead the boy to the notion he wanted him to. It took him a few moments to realize the blank look on Naruto's face wasn't one of contemplation, but of not being able to understand what he was asking. That brought a frown to the fox's face. Clearly, either his vessel was retarded or he had reverted to primal instincts and had a difficult time understanding concepts. Suddenly, he had a bright idea. Slowly, a red tendril of yokoi extended from the kitsune's head over to Naruto's body, creating a mental link. This link would allow him to pass on the idea behind his thoughts without any need for words. To his glee, the boy was able to comprehend this, only to frown. Naruto's thoughts wallowed in self-pity and guilt, and it took all of his restraint not to growl. The villagers clearly had done a great amount of damage if the boy was becoming despondent and wishing to die because he thought he deserved the beatings, physical and verbal, that they gave him. Because he thought he was a demon. To this the Kyuubi did growl, but he steadied himself and forced feelings of calmness into the mental link. This had the effect of causing the boy's breathing to slow down and regulate itself, his skin color returned to normal, and his sweating to subside. What had they done? The boy's mental faculties were obviously underdeveloped for one his age, and he would have to work hard to fix that problem. Finally, he managed to get a coherent response out of Naruto. He wanted to be able to run away from the mobs that chased him and stealthily evade people before they coagulated together for a common cause. How interesting, the Kyuubi mused. He didn't want to get revenge or be able to defend himself, but rather to avoid hostility altogether so he wouldn't have to hurt anyone. But he needed more than that to push him on. Using the mental link to take a glance at Naruto's overlying mentality, he found only a few people that Naruto cared for, but those few he adored with an absoluteness that could only be envied. One of them he recognized as being the retired Hokage, but the other two seemed to be common civilians. He disliked prodding Naruto along, but he would have to use this as bait. He passed along a mental concept: if Naruto did not get strong enough, then those who would try to hurt him would hurt them by proxy if they couldn't get to him. Visible rage planted itself onto the boy's body as he began to tremble. He didn't want Tucci and AM to suffer just because people couldn't get over the Kyuubi attack. With newfound conviction, he looked up at the giant demon fox towering over him, separated only by bars and a seal. How? Become a ninja, was the thought the nine-tailed kitsune gave to him. Ninjas could manipulate a form of energy that could do many things, such as create a wall of earth, heal wounds, cast illusions, or allow him to walk up walls. Naruto took the time to mull over it, but it didn't take long. If it would help him protect two of the only three people who had ever visibly cared about him, he was at least able to understand that his Jiji was able to defend himself against most anything, then he would do it. Happy that his vessel was complying with his own wishes, the Kyuubi finally sent a final nudge through the mental link. Would Naruto allow him to implant some of his own memories that would allow him to be able to understand the language of words and be able to read, write, and talk at a 14-year-old's level? What the Kyuubi didn't say was that he needed permission to do such a thing, but he ignored passing that along for now. Thankfully, Naruto nodded, the gesture being one of the only non-malicious gestures he had learned in his 5 years. The red line suddenly surged as massive amounts of chakra was pumped through it over the period of a few seconds, the flow providing a hypnotic side as it looked much akin to a vibrating string. It ended just as suddenly, and the Kyuubi quickly cut off the mental link as his container's mindscape avatar began to shake. It was a side effect of what he had just done, the brain was working overtime to take in all the new information. The Sandaime Hokage was contemplating over what Itachi had outlined as to what he wanted to do. This final brutal attack today had shown him that there was a part of Konoha that would never let go of their obsessive hatred of the Kyuubi and by proxy its container. He had hoped originally that Naruto would be treated as a hero, just like the Yondaime wanted him to. When that had failed, he passed a law making the information in S-class state secret and hoped that the pain and sorrow from the Kyuubi would fade from the older generation and the younger generation wouldn't be biased against Naruto, but the best laid plans of a man can collapse the instant he starts to enact them. Unfortunately, that was exactly what had occurred in this case, as people disregarded the Yondaime's final wish and used Naruto as a proxy, an outlet for their frustrations and pain from the Kyuubi attack. He himself had been over 50 when he was forced back into the Hokage position after the Yondaime's death. With a few years of relaxation, he had been rusty, and with all the paperwork and diplomacy that had to be done in the fallout of the attack, he had gotten lax and lenient, allowing his old teammates, Danzo, and the councils to sap far too much power from the Hokage's office. While he still held a great amount of authority, when it came to Naruto, most of the shinobi under his command disregarded that authority. The moan interrupted the sigh that he was about to let out, and both him and Itachi looked over to the source of the noise to see a Naruto who had emerged from his formerly motionless state. They looked at each other as a flash of worry passed between their eyes, and Itachi went out to call a doctor. Yes, Sarutobi mused, perhaps it would be best if he could have Naruto smuggled out and taught how to defend himself until he could one day come back capable of evading his predators. For Naruto, pain had been a constant in his life, but this was something foreign to him. He was used to physical and verbal beatings, but this was different. The sheer influx of knowledge had caused an overload on his brain, and his head felt an intense pressure as neurons struggled to cope, each of them sending a signal to another neuron, then collecting sodium and potassium mineral it let out before repeating the process another 2 milliseconds later. The whole process took roughly 30 seconds, but it felt like an eternity. When it ended, there was a brief moment in which his mind blanked before he had an awakening of sorts to his mindscape. While there was still the giant nine-tailed kitsune residing behind the gates in a giant sewer, it was no longer quite so dreary. The water that had been flowing along the sewer floors had retreated a few inches and the darkness had subsided as his surroundings had become brighter to the point of mere dimness. Even better, he could now read the single kanji that was displayed on the paper that held down the door. It read seal. It took a few more seconds for his new knowledge to catch up with the rest of his state of mind, and he was astounded at just how much he had missed out on while growing up. He marveled as he was able to put words to ideas and concepts. For example, he was in his mindscape. Behind those bars that acted as a prison stood a giant animal known as a fox, or more accurately, a kitsune, but there was little enough difference as far as he was concerned that he imagined he would constantly be interchanging the terms in reference to his prisoner. However, he was still ignorant, so when he opened his mouth to speak, all he could say was whoa. The demon fox laughed. Naruto tried to reason that laugh out in his head. It wasn't a deep laugh, so he wouldn't call it a bellow. It was of a good nature, not so obnoxious he would call it a giggle, but well-meaning enough to call it a chuckle. Yes, he would call it a chuckle, and it made him feel warm inside to finally find a fourth person who didn't hate him with a passion. He mentioned as much to the kitsune, who immediately sobered up at the thought of the villagers. He chose his words carefully so as to elicit an honest response from his jailer. Well, Gaki, now that you know I am here, there are some things that you can do. Do you hate this village for how they have treated you? Do you hate it enough that you want to destroy it? Now, Naruto may have been 5, but he has seen and experienced more than enough in his life that he wouldn't care to live much longer of it if it weren't for the survival instincts that every human being has, Moreso for a Jinchuriki, who no matter how strong the seal that contains their demon, will always be influenced by the demon's underlying need to live after millennia of immortality. He was also empathetic enough that he wouldn't wish the hell that was his life on anyone, so he shook his head. I'll be the first to admit that I hate everyone for what they've done for me. After all, here I am talking to you, so obviously I'm not you, but they still take it out on me. But, and here Kyuubi made a motion that seemed like he was leaning in closer to listen to the young vessel, I wouldn't want anybody to live through what I've been. Beatings, multiple attempted killings, torture, and being made to feel insignificant. If I were to destroy this village, there would be repercussions that could lead to others having similar lives to what I've been through. No more, please. The fox just sighed. So much for completing his attack on Konoha, even if it wasn't one that he willingly started. Besides, this child made such a good plea and argument. It was then that he finally took a close look at Naruto. Noting the blonde hair and blue eyes, he filed that information away for later and finally got down to business. In that case, Gaki, how about this? I have already informed you of the pros of being a ninja, and you want to do it so that the few people whom have actually given a damn about you will not come to harm as a result of their association with you. However, you can also add to the list gaining strength enough so others do not have to live the same way as you did. As for how we would go about that, the main thing I can do in the matter is train you. I may be a demon, but that does not mean I am always in my fox form. During my tens of thousands of years in this realm of mortals, I have infiltrated many societies and gathered more than enough knowledge to keep you covered. Much of what I can teach you is knowledge that has long since been destroyed by human hands, and you can use that to your advantage. Additionally, you will have to eventually socialize with other people and quite possibly other demons as well, and I can impart on you some measure of social skills. We kitsunes are known for being trickers, we are cunning, and we love challenges and puzzles, so you could stand to benefit there as well. Finally, there is the matter of the seal that was used to contain me and you. As I have already mentioned, there is a form of energy that you can use to perform all the tricks of the trait of a ninja, called chakra. I am a Bijuu, one of 9 demons that are for all practical purposes manifestations of pure chakra. I will go into detail on that later, but suffice to say that I have infinite chakra. At this point, Naruto was beginning to be overwhelmed with all the possibilities he had. Here he was, practically being offered the chance to become possibly the most powerful human in the world, but had to snap his attention back to the talking kitsune. However, due to the manner in which I was sealed, I no longer have infinite chakra. Instead, every day since you were born, my chakra has, in a sense, pushed against your own chakra. Human beings are capable of increasing the amount of chakra that their body can generate over a lifetime, but the most convenient method is to constantly be using large amounts of chakra. That way your chakra coils can increase in size, and your body knows to create more to be able to keep up with day-to-day use. As I said before, my chakra pushed against yours, so your body has had to constantly keep up. This has had the effect of you having as much chakra as if you had been training non-stop to about 3/5 of your maximum capacity every day since you were born. Additionally, the seal also converts some of my chakra to human chakra for your own use. At the rate it acts, after about every 7 years you will have absorbed a full tail from me. At this, the Kyuubi finally stopped and let Naruto think it over. As an ancient demon, one that had been powerful enough to nearly obliterate Konoha and take it off the map, the Kyuubi would make the perfect sensei. But there was that problem of nearly taking out the entirety of Konoha, hence, narrowing his eyes at the mammoth fox before him, he objected with his concerns. You might be the perfect sensei, but there is a matter of problems with trust here. And besides that, what's in it for you? The Kyuubi knew exactly what he was talking about and a grin of pleasure lit his snout. His container might be ignorant, but at least he wasn't stupid, or this would have been a lot more difficult for him. Hi, indeed there is. Suffice to say, it was not my choice to attack Konoha. I was paralyzed and tricked into attacking Konoha by somebody who managed to exploit my state of bloodlust, wherein I simply cannot control myself. Seeing Naruto begin to speak up, he cut him off before he could get a chance to start. I should hope you have enough tact to not ask about the specific details, and hi, I can be defeated, or else I would not have been sealed in a flesh bag of a mortal. That caused Naruto to twitch at the insult, but he calmed himself down to listen some more. The one who sealed me summoned the death god at the cost of his own life to seal me away. The Shinigami is above me on the hierarchy of greater beings, and he used enough of his own power to seal me away. However, the Shinigami is lazy. At this point in time, one could practically see the figurative sweat drop rolling from Naruto's forehead. Well, not really lazy. Usually, the jutsu that the Yondaime used would have killed me, but that flesh bag was smart. He realized the possibility that even death could not contain me, which was a possibility. Instead, he used the Shinigami power to seal me away. There was one problem with it though. The amount of power that the Shinigami used on your seal was not absolute. Instead, the amount of power that enforces it is proportional to the sacrifice made by the Yondaime. In effect, the seal only has enough power to hold completely for 14 years, after which it will begin to wear out. Pausing, he saw the panic cross Naruto's face. He knew that there was going to be a big reaction coming soon, so he tried to nip the rose in the bud before it had the chance to sprout. Calm down. He roared, with just a slight bit of his killing intent behind it to shake away Naruto's would-be protest. Either way, I will be free, whether you like it or not, but my only goal when I get free is to hunt down the one who forced me into attacking Konoha. Other than that, you need not fear me doing anything to interrupt your own goals. That brings me to the next issue. In 9 more years, the seal that keeps me and you will quickly dissolve, and the only thing that can slow the process down will be the strength of your willpower. At your best, I figure you could probably hold it for another 10 years, but at worst, I would burst out immediately. Thankfully for me, there are no other effects of the seal that will really have the power to harm me after that. For you, however, your body is used to my demonic chakra that pulses through your body. If I leave, then you will lose the source of that demonic chakra, and unless you go through a certain process, you will die shortly thereafter. For my part, I do not care for the guilt of letting you die, especially after what you have gone through in your life. Demons would not do what those people did to you. We consider children the most precious thing of all. So you either accept when we get to that part or you die. Seeing Naruto nod numbly at his proclamation, he then proceeded to talk again. Now, as for why I would teach you, there are a few reasons. First and foremost is that until I get free, if you die before you are 14, I die. You have probably wanted to kill yourself more than a few times, but the sheer desire of mine to live would have overwhelmed your suicidal notions, no matter whether I was sleeping or not. Therefore, I will do everything in my power to keep you from dying, so the more able you are to protect yourself, the better, and I doubt there are many of those pitiful ninjas who would willingly teach you, so I would have to do it myself. The second reason is pride. We demons constantly look to one-up each other, so if I were to make you the most powerful human alive, that would reflect well on me. I do not intend to have a weak vessel, or else I would be the laughingstock of the entirety of Makai, something I am not keen on witnessing. Is that clear? By this time, Naruto was sitting on the ground in a cowering position, his arms tucked underneath his legs. Even so, he still had his head facing the Kyuubi, and there was still a strong hint of defiance in his cerulean eyes. The ancient demon fox took that defiance for a yes. Good, then, good. Now, there is an immediate situation that we need to turn to our advantage. We are in your mindscape, yes, but time is also passing on the outside. The one that you think of as your old man is a powerful figure with much authority, and he is currently standing right next to you, waiting for you to wake up. There are two other figures as well, one whose chakra seems like that wretched Uchiha clan, but different in a manner. I think you can probably keep him around as well for what I want you to do. The third figure seems to be a doctor of sorts, as I can sense a medical chakra emanating from his body. Ask him to be sent away, ask for privacy in the room, then tell the Uchiha that I want to talk to the both of them. Seeing Naruto's questioning glance at that last order, he added on, the Uchiha have a dijutsu that allows them to penetrate to a degree into one's mindscape, and he can bring the Hokage in with him. I can force time to be slower in here than on the outside, plus it acts as another security measure, and then I can talk to all three at once. Understood. Naruto took a minute to absorb the instructions, rolled it around in his head, then responded, Hi, Kyuubi Dono. It may be true that the Kyuubi was imprisoned right now, and he could kill the Kyuubi sometimes within the next 7 years by taking his own life, but you still don't piss off a demon lord, so he tried his best to keep his respect. The Kyuubi just let another demonic grin light his face. This might not be too bad, and he might even get another loyal half-demon out of the deal. In that case, it is time for you to wake up. The smell of sterility was the first thing that caught Naruto's attention as he woke up. Second was the intense bright flare that attacked his eyes as he tried opening up his eyelids, before tightening them shut. Opening them more slowly, he noticed the plain white of his room, before his view was dominated by one Hiruzen Sarutobi. His first reaction was to sit up, shouting Oji-san. At the same time, while he managed to say what he wanted, he had to stutter it out as his focus was shattered from the pains that shot up his back and arms as he tried to use them for leverage. Sarutobi was glad to see that Naruto was still enthusiastic even after a beating on his birthday for crying out loud, something which stabbed him in the heart with guilt for his failings, but involuntarily flinched when he saw that the enthusiasm didn't quite reach his sea blue eyes. No matter, hopefully it was something that he could resolve while he was here. He didn't expect what came next. Naruto quickly understood that his back wasn't healed, so he leaned back on his bed, though he made the curious gesture of crossing his arms over the chest. It was Naruto's request that he was unprepared for. Oji-san, I need to talk to you. Seeing the doctor standing near the door, he added, in private. It took the request a second to be processed in Sarutobi's head. Seeing no harm in it, he nodded towards the doctor to leave, but was surprised when Naruto added, the masked guy should stay though. How had he detected Itachi? No matter, Sarutobi mused, he might have just had a sixth sense for that sort of thing. It wouldn't have been too surprising for one of his heritage. With the doctor out of the room, the Hokage performed a few hand seals that blocked off all sound from entering or exiting the room. He couldn't really see any need for complete privacy, but after decades as the Hokage, where he often had to handle confidential information and S-class to SSS class state secrets, he did it entirely out of instinct from being asked for privacy. After those villagers beat me up, I talked to him. The emphasis that Naruto placed on that last word was all that was needed for Sarutobi to instantly freeze up and for Itachi in the corner to tense up. Walls came crashing down in Sarutobi's mind as he had realized just who Naruto was talking about. Hoping against hope for Naruto to be talking about someone else, he tried playing dumb and asked why Naruto, who are you talking about? It then suddenly occurred to him Naruto could talk beyond the most basic one-syllable words, and he wasn't slowly drawling trying to think of the next word in his sentence. His heart sank as his false hope was crushed. Don't play dumb with me, Oji-san. A scowl echoed itself from Naruto's face across his eyes and eyebrows. You know who I'm talking about. I'm talking about the fox. So it was true. His heart raced 1,000 beats a minute trying quickly to come up with a solution to the situation, but Naruto quickly put an end to any efforts to change the direction of the conversation. Anyway, he wants to talk to you. Both of you. I don't know why he wants to talk to the masked guy, but I think he said something about Sharingan and using it to access one's mindscape and being able to share use of it. If Sarutobi had ever stopped to think about it, he would have burst out laughing at his visualizations of what Itachi Uchiha's face looked like at that moment in time. The most powerful non-divine being in existence, capable of striking fear into men's hearts by its mere name, wanted to talk to him. Screw the Uchiha stoicness, there was no way he could say anything for at least the next minute without tripping over his tongue, and it took twice as long to regain his composure. Sarutobi narrowed his eyes, then took a deep breath in and a deep breath out. So he finally talked to you, did he now? A nod. And he wants to meet us? Another nod. He forced himself into another breath before sighing at the whole situation. There simply wasn't anything else he could do, no matter how much he wanted to get away from it. But he was a leader and he had promised Minato to carry out his wish and he wasn't going to disappoint him by leaving his legacy out in the dark like this. Very well then. Itachi, he said, catching the Anbu's attention, do you know what he's talking about in regards to accessing one's mindscape? Itachi, who had since abandoned any pretense of hiding in the corner, quickly bobbed his head, plotting out each sentence word by word in his head before daring to speak. That I do, Hokage-sama. But if I may ask, are you sure? Can we really trust a demon? Sarutobi's head creased, a sign of his age and the stress of the job catching up with him. No, we most certainly cannot trust the demon, but with the seal as it is, we can at least find some semblance of answers that I have always wanted to have. Kitsunes don't lie, but they will twist the meanings of their words around until you can't distinguish heads from tails, so be on your guard. Now, about that mind access technique. Itachi bowed, not really liking what he was going to have to do, but doing it anyways. Grabbing a hold of the Hokage's hand, he activated his Sharingan eyes, the 3 Tomo in each red iris, swirling around their respective pupils wildly, before darkness descended upon their consciousnesses. It was slightly disorienting for Naruto to be re-entering his mindscape, and he could only hope that side effect would fade away over time, as he imagined he would be doing this quite a few times in the future. Fortunately for him and his 2 guests, this time their avatars started out inside the giant room that housed a fox, as opposed to the end of the sewers that he originally started out. Naruto didn't have much time to ponder about it, though, because as soon as all 4 figures were in the area, he instantly poofed out of existence, leaving not even a trail of smoke behind. Forgetting himself for the briefest of moments, Sarutobi looked over at the giant demon fox beside the cage and said, what the hell was that for? As soon as he finished his sentence, he immediately realized just who, making sure to differentiate from the term what in his head, he was talking to. No matter, the Kyuubi was caged by the Shikifujin, though he would need to be respectful to at least prod some knowledge out of the Kyuubi. For his own part, the demon in question didn't seem to be disturbed as he reared and rolled his eyes. It was an oddly human gesture to the 2 humans in the chamber, but they didn't let it affect them as the Kyuubi spoke. There are some things that I will probably end up speaking of that child need not know of. For Naruto, because the Kyuubi was a part of his mindscape, there were side effects that changed the manner in which he experienced Kyuubi's presence. To him, the giant fox's voice didn't seem too deep or too loud or anything out of place. To the 2 foreigners, however, they had to discipline themselves to keep steady underneath the deep baritone tone that the Kyuubi's voice exhibited. This intimidation factor was all the better for the Kyuubi. While Naruto may have favored the Sandaime Hokage as one of his precious people, Sarutobi still had obligations to the rest of Konoha, and he had been far too ineffective at times for the Kitsune's liking. For now, however, he would bait them in with information. First and foremost, you probably want to know why I attacked Konoha 5 years ago. That got their attention, as what seemed to be irreverent focus before only increased as 2 pairs of eyes bore into his own, doing their best to get him to speak fast. But before I do, I suppose I should comfort you over the possibility of me lying about anything. I swear everything I henceforth say here is truthful on my honor as the Kitsune Lord. Sarutobi let out a small breath at this proclamation here. Before, he was going to peruse every word the 9-tailed demon said with distrust, but now he could drop his guard a little bit. Although he was no expert on demonology, he knew well enough that no demon would break his or her word if they could help it. As you may know, your Shodai Hokage had a bloodline ability that allowed him to, in a sense, calm the Bijuusa's yokai. He paused for a second, gauging the best moment for dramatic effect. However, the Uchiha clan's filthy Sharingan is, at its highest level, capable of controlling me, specifically. The Kyuubi finally looked down directly at the Hokage and the teenage Uchiha, letting his gaze rest on them. He let go of the inhibitions he held on his presence, and the two had to rely on sheer will to not stagger underneath the full power of his aura. I will not go into the specifics of how the Sharingan has that much power, it is a little bit of an embarrassment to me. What you do need to know is this. Uchiha Madara is a thrice damned traitor as far as Konoha should be occurred. First, he betrayed your pathetic village. Second, he called on my power to fight your Shaddai Hokage, causing the landscape to change in the process. And finally, he was the one whom forced me into attacking 5 years ago. This finally elicited a response from his audience, and the Uchiha protested, but how can that be? Madara was said to be dead when he fought Hashirama Senju at the Valley of the End. Even if he did manage to survive that battle, he would be over 90 years old by now. That is true, the demon fox admitted. However, for all intents and purposes, Madara appears to be immortal. How that came to be, even I, with my millennia of knowledge, do not know. He paused, recollecting his thoughts as he remembered the purpose as to why they were all here. Your Hokage knows that is a demon, I cannot lie, so be assured that what I have just said is the unbridled truth. That is why I sent the Gaki away, as I do not believe he should hear about this until he is at least somewhat older. A nod from Sarutobi signified the unspoken acceptance of that argument, and the nine-tailed being continued to dominate the conversation. Aside from that, we needed to have a little chat, Sandaime Hokage. The third clearly flinched at the icy tone behind the Vulpine's last sentence, but kept his composure, something he had found himself struggling with so far, and just what would that be, oh great Kyuubi-san? Okay, maybe he had to reinforce his posture with sarcasm. Kyuubi decided to ignore the sarcasm, mainly so as to not antagonize his audience. It has to do with the treatment of the Gaki in this village. If it were not for the trauma inflicted upon him in this latest incident, I would not have awoken, and he would continue to have been ignorant for a few more years. It is fortunate however that this has occurred so quickly. After all, and here he hissed and sneered at Itachi and Sarutobi to emphasize his point, it would not do good for Konoha if he were to die prematurely or lose the will to live and allow me to escape, would it now? Now that got the attention of the Anbu captain and the Hokage, as they both visibly whitened at the thought of an unleashed Kyuubi with the village still recovering. For as much of a genius your Yondaime was at sealing, which I have to admit my respect for, even he could not create a seal that would put me in a human vessel, that did not require at least some semblance of willpower to keep me in. The two standing before him exchanged glances to give mutual support. Seeing their rational sides losing out, he decided to tone down the potency of his aura and continued, relax, I will not attack Konoha if I have a conscious choice to the matter. Seeing the questioning looks they gave him, he clarified, I have examined the seal that your Yondaime Hokage used in combination with the Shiki Fuin, the Haki no Fukin Shiki. Again, a genius piece of art. It apparently will purify some of my chakra over time, which will then be absorbed into the boy, to the tune of approximately 1 tail every 7 years. If the boy should die when I have 7 tails or less, I will be able to control my chakra. If he dies before then, however, I will not be able to control my chakra, and my mere being will explode all at once, which includes all 9 tails. Silence reigned throughout the chamber, aside from the occasional drip from the pipes and walls. It was after a long period of contemplation that the Sandaime Hokage spoke up, well, Itachi, I think you will get your wish now. However, it won't be as minimalist as you wanted. Hokage-sama. Itachi spoke up for the first time in what felt like whatever, disoriented from the influx of knowledge he had just heard, and sickened at the prospect of what could have occurred every time somebody got it into their head that they needed to kill the Kyuubi Gaki, Uzumaki Naruto. They could have taken out the entirety of Konoha, and depending on just how large the blast radius would have been, possibly most of Hai no Kuni, and disrupting the border countries of Ta no Kuni and Kawa no Kuni. Any of the tailed beasts had tremendous amounts of power, but the 9-tailed fox was the most powerful of them all, said to have infinite chakra, and to have it all expelled at once could disrupt the entire balance of the world order and lead to war. Uchiha Itachi, Weasel, captain of the Anbu Black Ops, effective when we leave this mindscape, you will leave your regular assignment. Thereafter, once he is finished healing, you will take Uzumaki Naruto to training ground 46 and train him over a period of 2 years. Looking up towards the giant demon fox, he continued, don't think I didn't find it odd that Naruto could speak with such clairvoyance, Kyuubi-san. As long as you don't try turning Naruto against Konohagakure and don't cause harm to him, I have no problem with you teaching whatever it is you wish. The demon fox displayed that creepy grin that one could only see on a 40-story tall crimson fox, a leer of sorts. Oh, have no worries, I have plenty that I can teach him. However, there is plenty of knowledge that I did not find necessary to learn during my romps amongst ninjas, most importantly any form of taijutsu or simple physical movement. And of course, I cannot exactly get him to eat healthily, thanks to all those grocers throwing him out of their stores. However, the Uchiha is more than welcome to come back into my jailer's mindscape here, as I can slow things down in here to make the passage of time on the outside almost negligible. It was with a start that the Kyuubi remembered just what clan Itachi had come from, so he took the time to take a pointed glaze at Itachi. That reminds me. Have you heard of the Mangekyo Sharingan? The grim look that took over Itachi's face was enough confirmation for the nine-tailed kitsune. Do not be so despondent, young Uchiha. I can tell you may be a great influence on the Uchiha clan. Never forget, all bloodlines came from demonic influence, and it was I who molded the Sharingan. Disturbingly enough for the two whom have been forced to listen to the nine-tailed's musings, he seemed almost tired. All Uchiha have a sinister quality to their chakra as a result of my own influence, but the sinister quality in yours is the weakest I've ever seen. You and Madara are opposites in that way, and here he positively growled loud enough to demonstrate his hatred towards the Uchiha ancestor. In fact, I would say Madara's chakra is more sinister than my own. The Kyuubi finally took one last gaze specifically on the weasel. If you can train my vessel well enough, and should you ever achieve the state of the Mangekyo Sharingan, I can gift you with something that will enhance those eyes of yours. Mind you, that is if you do your job in training that gaki. At that, Itachi finally butted into the conversation. That's all fine and well, Kyuubi-san, Hokage-sama, but surely there will be some missions that you will need to send me on. I cannot imagine that you can afford to have me living with a boy 24/7 for a few years without something coming up requiring my expertise. It was a good point, the Hokage thought. He took out his pipe and lit it up, taking a deep whiff of the smoke from the clover leaves before exhaling. That was the nice thing about the mindscape. You could get the pleasure and stress release without having the physical drawback actually occurring. Contemplating, he came up with a solution. I know a fairly talented teacher who has recently retired from the academy and been promoted to Takubetsu Jonin. He's not nearly as talented as you are in Genjutsu or Ninjutsu, Itachi, to which the person in question just snorted. After all, he put in a great amount of dedication to mastering every jutsu he came across, knowing every quirk of a technique and how to best apply it to a situation rather than straight up attacking. But he's excellent at laying a foundation for the basics, good at chakra control and decent at nature manipulation, and can also teach Naruto some more recent history, he said, making a subtle jab at the Kyuubi, who he imagined as knowing history about civilizations 5,000 years past, but not bothering to learn much if anything about the past 100 years and the emergence of the hidden villages. His name is Ibisu, and although he doesn't hold any dislike towards Naruto for being a Jinchuriki, he's easily impressionable, so it would be good for him to see the real deal before hearing the lies. The Kyuubi no Kitsune realized that the Sandaime was trying to wrap up the conversation on his own part, but there was one thing that he needed to talk to the Hokage about in private, away from even the ears of the Uchiha. Hokage, you should stick around. I need to talk to you in private after this in a matter that doesn't involve the Uchiha. The Hokage's eyes narrowed, wondering what the great demon lord had in mind that needed truly private discussion, while Itachi stayed stoic-faced, although he was no less curious. I will need to secure something in the outside world, so for now I will take your leave. Have no fear, I have my own method of getting into young Naruto's mindscape. Itachi, choose your words carefully. Kyuubi-san here may not have been responsible for the attack on Konoha, but he has no reason for loyalty or allegiance to Konoha. A blink later, he flicked out of existence, exiting the mindscape. For his part, the Kyuubi let out a short bellow. How right that he is. But it is in my interests to have a capable vessel, and fortunately for Konoha, he does not want to destroy it, so I will not push him in that direction, but that does not mean I will allow him to take the crap that he does have to deal with almost daily. Itachi just sighed. It wasn't every day that you had a semi-casual conversation with an ancient demon lord. Unsure as to how to respond to that, he instead said, that's nice and all, Kyuubi-san, but I would rather we not stray from the topic that we are supposed to discuss. The fox decided to oblige the Uchiha, and both got down to business, with the demon sitting down on his rear end, as if it were a fireside chat. With no words wasted and two genius minds between them, they quickly came to the agreement in a surprisingly pleasant manner. The Kyuubi would teach Naruto in certain areas of knowledge. He did not believe that Naruto's mind could withstand another sheer transfer of knowledge, like he had done earlier. He explained this to Itachi in heavy technical terms, involving neuron and saturation of electrical signals, such as ancient history, jutsu theory, for with high chakra capacity and an ability to regenerate most wounds, Naruto definitely could experiment more than most with creating new jutsus and fuinjutsu, as well as imparting what he knew about Jinchuriki, the Bijuu and demonic society, noting that someday Naruto might have to defend himself against either other Jinchuriki or demons, or fight off people wanting Kyuubi's power, and therefore it would be best to know all he could about demons. Lastly, he would teach him some methods of chakra control for Yakai if he ever needed to use the demonic form of energy. For his own part, Itachi would mainly teach Naruto regular ninjutsu. He was a bit peeved when he realized that his new protege would have a difficult time using genjutsu because he had two different chakra sources, but was pleased when it occurred to him that it also meant he could be all but immune to genjutsu used against him with practice. The fox also requested that he not teach any specific taijutsu. Instead, Kyuubi wanted him to teach Naruto how to move his body and limbs with minimal exertion and maximum efficiency, noting that because of him, Naruto would never be able to adapt to any rigid style of fighting. Itachi didn't question him on it, but he gathered that the Kyuubi meant that Naruto would probably gain an insane amount of body flexibility and gracefulness. It was also with some pleasure that the Anbu captain realized that because of the regeneration factor of the Kyuubi's yokai, Naruto could increase his muscle mass dozens of times quicker than a normal human being's. Recalling the numerous broken bones he had seen the sun-haired boy obtain from various beatings over the year, Itachi also resolved to get an X-ray done of Naruto's skeletal structure to see if they were denser or larger than a normal person's bones. Finally, they plotted out what they wanted Ibisu to do. Itachi had actually heard of him before and knew that he had taught a couple of children of nobles before in addition to his tutoring of ninjas. But that knowledge in hand, they added how to act in society to the list of things they wanted Ibisu to do, though the fox would need to teach Naruto how to act around demons as well if it ever came to necessity. Pleased at the productive conversation, the fox sent Itachi out of the mindscape after reminding him to have Sarutobi come back in. Time in Naruto's mindscape was different than on the outside. The Kyuubi estimated that he had talked with Itachi for about an hour, which was only about 5 minutes on the outside. Given that he had about 12 times the amount of time what it would take for the Sandaime to come back into the mindscape, he pondered over what he was about to discuss next with the wizened ruler. The popping noise indicated the presence of the aged man. Not wanting to spend any more time around the demon lord than he had to, he asked quickly, "Now then, what is it exactly that you wanted to discuss in private, Kyuubi-san?" "It involves the GAKI parents." That got a reaction out of the third Hokage. I don't know what you're talking about," Sarutobi stuttered, then decided to throw any pretense of ignorance to the winds and interrupted himself, "Okay, I suppose you already have a very strong suspicion of whom his father is, I'm guessing." The Kyuubi was amused at how quickly his verbal opponent decided to give up the game, but decided not to press that point in his favor. "I do not suspect, I know who the Gaki's father is. It simply makes too much sense. The man who would sacrifice his own eternal soul to save his village could not ask anyone else to offer up their child as a lamb, and I am fairly sure that that sunny gold shade of blonde and blue eyes is not very common in Konohagakure." The Hokage for his part just sighed in defeat and asked what appeared to be the million-dollar question of the conversation, "Does Naruto know about this yet?" He prayed against all hope that the boy didn't. He wasn't sure if Naruto could take 2 mental shocks in one day, and he wasn't sure either if he could impress upon him strongly enough not to go around blabbing he was the son of the Yondaime Hokage. Thankfully for him, the Kyuubi was on his side in regards to this issue. "No, he most definitely does not. I feared just as much as you likely did what kind of mental instability could result from such an influx of surprises, and so I have withheld that knowledge from him. Even I do not know what the ramifications of mental instability could be between my presence and this seal, so I would rather not take my chances." He paused, taking a deep breath, and then proceeded to talk again, "But you will need to tell him soon, sometimes within the next 5 years, if you want him to still trust you afterwards. I get the feeling you would have held off until he was at least a genin before telling him about me, never mind the fact that my mere presence means his chakra control would have been shot and prevented him from becoming one, meaning he would not know about me until he pieced it together from all the words people throw at him, or worse, concluding that he was me." Seeing that he had laid enough guilt on the third Hokage and feeling he had said his piece, he let the man think. It was true what the Kyuubi had said, Sarutobi thought. If he waited on his own to tell Naruto about Kyuubi being sealed in him, he would have waited until Naruto was at least a genin. By this time, he wasn't sure how helpful the teachers at the academy would have been, and without chakra control, he likely would never pass the basic ninjutsu test and the genin exam overall. But what was done, so he mulled over the situation and came to a decision. Once Naruto serves in some sort of capacity as a ninja, official or not, I'll tell him of his heritage then. By that time, I can rely on his mentality being able to be stable, and by then Itachi, and hopefully you will have beat out of him the capability to be arrogant over being a Hokage's son." The Kyuubi chuckled over that last remark. It made sense, and he didn't want his vessel to gain any preconceived notions and become cocky and overestimate himself. "In that case, I think we have a decision. Goodbye, Sandaime Hokage, and if you have any need to talk to me, feel free to do so." Having made sure to keep on Hiruzen Sarutobi's good side and not bring any unnecessary ire down on him, he waited for the sexagenarian to exit before thinking about his new situation as a prisoner within a human boy and how to best turn the situation to his advantage. It took the Sandaime a second to reorient himself and adjust to the surroundings of the hospital room. Looking around, he saw Itachi with his weasel mask back on, waiting for orders. He wasn't sure how long the 15-year-old had been waiting, as he too suspected that time in the mindscape could be slowed down relative to the real world, but he decided not to keep him waiting. Reaching into his robe pocket, he took out a wad of Ryo bills. Counting out the amount to file down later as shinobi expenses, he handed it over to the Anbu captain and explained, "Weasel-san, take this money and purchase whatever equipment you need to begin your lessons." He then idly remembered a comment that the Kyuubi had made earlier in their first conversation about Naruto's lack of food options. "You should also get whatever some groceries as well, as I can't imagine he's been able to get much of anything besides ramen, which isn't healthy, fox demon in his stomach or not. You have some sealing scrolls with you?" Receiving a nod from Itachi, he continued, "Very well then. The place I'm setting Naruto up with already has all the basics, but you might also want to get a cookbook as well, unless you plan on having Ibisu teach him that as well. I'll leave it to you whether or not you think you should acquaint him with hunting wild animals though. For now, go obtain whatever is necessary, then report back to my office once you're finished for further orders." Itachi bowed, with a short "hi, Hokage-sama," before he shunshined out of the room. The Hokage looked at the young boy resting in the bed. Those whisker marks always disturbed him whenever he saw them, a sign of the fox demon within him, but for once in the young boy's life, he might be able to see a light at the end of the dark tunnel. Brushing off his philosophical thoughts and thinking Naruto would be asleep for at least a few hours and wouldn't need him in the meantime, the Hokage took the initiative from his Anbu captain and shunshined a couple of times back to the Hokage tower. Walking up to his office, he sighed seeing a new pile of paperwork that hadn't been there when he'd left a few hours before, though the experience made it felt like years. Making a pair of cage buncheons to handle the paperwork, he sat down in a chair on the opposite side of the desk and took out the top paper from his sheaf from the office of the Hokage and pen. With his wrinkled hand he wrote out his orders to Ibisu, as well as a few choice words on how he expected his behavior to be in regards to Naruto, as well as how conflicting duties would be handled and his wage. Stamping the paper, he rolled it up and sealed it with an official seal for Itachi to handle when he came back. But that out of the way, the Hokage walked up to the 4 portraits on the wall of his 2 predecessors, himself at a much earlier age, and his successor. Putting his thumb in his mouth, he bit down on the skin hard enough to draw blood and smeared it across the top of his direct predecessor's odd Hittite. Now that he thought about it, what was it with the shape of the Hittite anyways? The portrait of Tobirama Senju glowed momentarily as the seal that protected the safe behind it activated. The Hokage grabbed the right edge of the painting and pulled it back, revealing the left end to be a hinge in the wall and exposing a small metal safe. Punching in a series of numbers that only 4 people alive knew, the safe door flipped open. There were a number of objects in the safe, but he quickly found what he so desired. When the Senju clan and Uchiha clan originally united to build Konohagakure almost a century ago, Hashirama Senju put his ability to make trees from nothing as well as his more subtle manipulations of wood to good use. The foliage that surrounded the village was what gave it its designation as the village hidden in the leaves. Many of the Leaf's training fields were also created thanks to the many jutsus that the Shodai Hokage came up with, but the most infamous one was training field number 44, better known as the Forest of Death. The trees in this training field were of monster sizes that no flora would ever grow to by normal means, but that was what made it the Forest of Death. Everything was super-sized there, from giant trees to giant man-eating plants to giant tigers. Because of the sheer amount of danger that one could find himself in by becoming lost in the forest, most jonin didn't go there, with Mitarashi Anko being the only common visitor, and it was rumored that she had a cabin in the forest where she lived, though the Sandaime had never bothered to verify or disprove the rumors. However, common thought says that as the Forest of Death is the last area to have a numerical designation, there are only 44 training areas in Konohagakure. Nothing could be further from the truth. In addition to the Hokage's own private training grounds, as well as a few areas exclusively for Jonin rank or higher and Anbu-only fields, there is another set of 6 areas from training field number 45 to training field number 50 that very few know about. The reason so few know about them is not because they are dangerous, and in fact they are relatively tame, but because they are protected with dozens of seals that prevent people from wandering into them. A person could get close to a training field and then suddenly have an urge to go back whence the way they came from. Additionally, these training fields are not easy to find, they are all within 10 to 30 kilometers west of the Hokage monument, and the dense forests Konoha is famous for blocks off each training ground, while one could still make it through the guardian forests, unless they know about the secret route through the trees for any particular area, it will be an arduous trek. Hence, these 6 areas are truly private grounds because the only way to get into them is to find a respective master seal and offer a drop of your blood onto this master seal and you will be able to access the training ground from then on. The master seal wasn't anything fancy, it was simply a piece of paper with some seals on them, which, once you put your blood on, would grant you immunity from all the seals that protected its respective training field. After a person was finished with using a field, his or her access could be wiped via use of the master seal. There was a reason that they were forbidden to all but a select few. Each training field has a diverse environment, with trees, a river or small lake, a waterfall of varying size, and terrain ranging from grass to sand to barren soil to solid rock. All 6 of them are topped off by their own individual cabin, able to fit up to 10 people each. In general, few were ever allowed access to these places. The only people any of the 4 Hokages to date had ever let in were either people of a particularly volatile status that needed maximum security or somebody who it was felt required a private training ground without any intrusion. Aburama Senju had once taken him and his old teammates Kaharu and Hamura to training ground number 48 for a period of 6 months of intensive training shortly before the outbreak of the First Great Shinobi War and they had come out of it for the better. Now, however, the next long-term resident of training ground number 46 would be there for both reasons. Sarutobi didn't trust leaving Naruto around the village any longer, especially now that the demon fox Kyuubi had awoken from his slumber in Naruto's mindscape and because the boy would need to train to be able to protect himself when he did come back from what was essentially an imposed exile. Additionally, while it wasn't the 300 square kilometer size that the fabled Forest of Death was, training ground number 46 was still fairly large, at over 50 square kilometers and isolated on the outskirts of Konoha west of the Hokage Monument. It was with a sigh that, after retrieving the master seal for training ground number 46, he took a look at his short-lived successors and unfortunately predecessors' portrait. Minato had been a living legend, having proven his worth via his exploits in the Third Great Shinobi War and had been immortalized in his sacrifice against the Kyuubi. Oh Minato, what would you have done? I'm getting too old for this shit and to top it off, I fear I might have made one mistake too many with your son. My only condolence is that he has held on against all odds and demonstrated a part of the will of fire. I can only hope he forgives me and, in time, surpasses your own deeds. As a low-density fluid, the air parted easily as a kunai whistled through the air, the curvature of its path providing its destination, light glinting off its silver sheen. Disappointingly for its caster, the point end of the projectile landed on the outer edge of the ring, with its shaft sunk in only a few inches. He showed his disappointment with a few choice words loud enough to cause the slightest of echoes, despite the open field he was currently in. Standing beside him was a figure donning a cowled white cloak that indicated his status as a captain of the Ansatsu Senjutsu Takushu Butai, most commonly referred to as Anbu. Surveying his new pupil's form every time he threw and watching the end result of each trial, he was quickly coming to a conclusion. Uzumaki Naruto lacked the skill, but his passion to improve burned hotter than the black flames of the legendary Amaterasu Jutsu. At this thought which he shook his head and decided to cut down the amount of time he spent around Guy. That was a good thing for Itachi Uchiha, however. Shortly after he had first activated his Sharingan at the tender age of 8, he had gotten into an altercation with the aforementioned bald-haired over his odd personality. Even though Guy had been 6 years older than him, he still thought that he would win easily thanks to his Dijutsu. It was with great shock that he was absolutely slaughtered in that battle, as he realized that even if he could see Guy's movements and the Sharingan's ability to keep up with them was still strained in comparison to the motion of other people, it meant nothing if the rest of his body couldn't keep up with his eyes. That had been a literal eye-opener to Itachi, and since then he had taken the lesson to heart, forcing his body through training sessions, almost as punishing as what Guy did, although even he couldn't be quite as enthusiastic as the spandex-clad man was in pain and sweat and blood. Over time, that had allowed his body to be able to catch up extensively with his eyes, and he had begun to become a prodigy of sorts. To the Uchiha clan, and most importantly his father Fugaku, head of the Uchiha, he was something they could brag about. He loathed it, as he had been consistently hyped up as a once-a-generation genius. He never once felt special, all he had ever done was to actually push his limits, something which he had awkwardly become aware that few Uchiha ever did. I was the one whom deserved to be put on a pedestal. If every ninja in the Uchiha clan and Konoha put in even a quarter of the effort that that man did, the great tree that was Konoha would benefit for it, and the will of fire would burn stronger. And yet, even though he had become a perfect physical specimen, he still relied too much on his Sharingan eyes. He came to realize this during his Anbu entry tests 2 years ago. On the Taijutsu examination, he performed with perfect marks, his only flaw being the relative lack of experience, having never been sent to the front lines in the Third Great Shinobi War. However, for the Jinjutsu portion, they brought in a chunin called Kurenai Yuuhi, who was quickly becoming known as the Jinjutsu Princess of Konoha. It was there he realized 2 flaws in his Sharingan. The first being that even if it can see through illusions to some degree, there is a point where he had to rely on himself to be able to break them. Secondly, even if he could take cues from or copy hand signs, it doesn't help when your opponent uses a genjutsu on you that doesn't use hand signs. Kurenai had gotten off more than a few genjutsus on him that way, and so he only did about average on the genjutsu portion. But it was the ninjutsu portion where he was truly humbled, as he had gone up against Kakashi Haddock, a Black Ops captain. Itachi had gotten to know him a slight bit over the past few years, ever since Haddock had gotten a Sharingan eye from one of Itachi's relatives. Throughout the whole fight Haddock had fought one-eyed, so Itachi had presumed that he would have an advantage, only to be once again defeated. It wasn't just the power behind the jutsu, as Itachi had increased his chakra reserve severalfold over the years thanks to his intense training, but also how one used it. It was Kakashi's clever use and mastery of several ninjutsus in rapid-fire combination that showed that even if one could use a jutsu, it meant nothing unless one knew how to use it. For Itachi Uchiha, it was a sad experience for him once he came to the conclusion that most Uchiha would have shrugged the results of the fights off and continued to believe in their own superiority because of the Sharingan. Ever since then, he had gone above and beyond the call of duty in breaking down everything he learned, understanding the theory behind it, putting it all back together and mastering it. In the process, he had struggled to encourage other members of the Uchiha clan to do the same as he was doing. Only a few caught onto it, with only minimal enthusiasm. His cousin Shisui, who he considered a second brother, was the only one whom had begun to see the light and do the same as he did, although he remained in the regular shinobi force, as opposed to joining Anbu. Itachi knew that he would be able to convince Sasuke of doing the same, as it was his image that the brother looked up to with almost unparalleled devotion. Itachi would leave his little brother be for a few more years, after all, he himself had been the way he once was until he had been 8 and shortly thereafter had become a genius. Let Sasuke have a childhood for a few years longer and then he would start training Sasuke himself. The blonde standing beside him, however, had no such timeline to be a child. He never had and never would have a chance to just be a carefree innocent child ever since the day that he was born and the Kyuubi was sealed in him. But it was also this that endeared Itachi to wanting to train Uzumaki Naruto himself. The boy had not once had anything to lose and he had everything to gain. He had fought tooth and nail every day of his life to survive his environment and would not back down until he had lost the will to live. He knew harshness and opposition and had never once fallen down and not gotten back up. But what truly boggled Itachi's mind was how if only Naruto could turn the Kyuubi, the one thing that had brought him his never say never attitude, towards increasing his strength, the boy had almost infinite potential. In addition to being able to build muscle and bone mass and density quickly and having almost instant regeneration, he also had nearly a limitless amount of chakra. With the Kyuubi actually taking a hand in young Naruto's teaching, he felt his new protege could become a kami amongst men. What had the raven-haired man to gain from this? He had thought about this a few times in the past few days and he couldn't put a clear finger to his motives. They weren't malicious reasons, although he admitted that a small part of him hated the boy because of irrational fear of the unknown and of his jealousy, he was able to put that aside and see someone in need of guidance. Some part of the why were ulterior motives, he wanted to be able to take pride in being the sensei to who he hoped to be a legendary shinobi, and to be able to show others that his methods of being a shinobi were the best, though he was unsure at what point in the future his hand in the boy's development would be able to be revealed. Another part was to make up for his clan's actions. To this day, he still found himself in disbelief whenever he thought about how the Uchiha clan brought to bear all of its political power to pressure anyone who had wanted to adopt the Kyuubi Gaki, and now that he knew that Uchiha Madara had instigated the attack against Konohagakure, also felt he owed a blood debt to Naruto for his clan having ruined his life. Itachi knew all too well his father Fugaku's motivations. Naruto was dangerous to Fugaku, not in the sense that Naruto held enough power to destroy Konoha if a conflict ever occurred with those two on opposite sides, but because Naruto could become so powerful as to put the Uchiha clan in his shadow. It was typical thinking like that Itachi detested, and he had slowly come to loathe his father over the last year as a result. In his own mind, if the clan was to be overshadowed by another clan or a person, then the clan needed to become strong enough to hold its own, not become petty and eliminate the threat before it could become an existential threat. Itachi had read through some of the secret Uchiha archives and had become disappointed at seeing how many clans in Konoha had become undercut by both the Uchiha and Hyuga clans in the past. Most particular was the Kurama clan, who had their clan halved in one night during the Second Great Shinobi War as a result of the aforementioned two Taijutsu clans becoming fearful of their strong genjutsus and having them sent on a suicide mission behind the Sandame's back. He was disgusted at the action of both clans and resolved that once he was clan head, he would do his best to root out the corruption. But beyond all these ulterior motives of Itachi, there was one that struck a chord in his stoic manner. It was how Naruto looked. His sea blue eyes and sunny blonde hair resembled the electric shock blue hues and golden coloring of the Yondame's own eyes and hair. It was something that Itachi had yet to think on consciously, but the resemblance was uncanny, and he was surprised nobody had remarked on it yet. It was this last fact that made up Itachi's motives. The Yondaime Hokage was one of the few men he had 100% respect for, both for the aura of power he exuded the few times Itachi had seen the man in person, as well as his unselfish sacrifice he made for Konoha. It was that sacrifice that saved Itachi and all he held dear from being vanquished by the majestic force of the Kyuubi, and it was the least that he could do to actually fulfill the Yondaime's wish to treat his legacy as a hero. It was with a jolt that Itachi broke free from his thoughts as he saw that Naruto had rethrown all 8 kunai in his possession. Looking over at the practice targets, he saw that his new student had gotten considerably closer the bullseye on the targets. He had had his Sharingan on and looking at Naruto the whole time while he was thinking, so he called up the memories of the images that had been burned into his retinas and analyzed the Jinchuriki's stance and throws. The results were beginning to show. Much better, Naruto. You're beginning to minimize the unnecessary movement from your body, but you're still relying too much on raw power and not enough on finesse. He was quite glad that the Kyuubi had extended his container's vocabulary to a level that he would be able to understand Itachi when he got into more technical terms. You also must remember to rely more on the flick of your wrist and your fingers as opposed to your arm to guide the direction of the kunai. It may not seem important now, but eventually you will be using shuriken as well, and they need spin velocity to work. After some practice and increase in skill level, you'll even be able to throw up to 4 kunai or shuriken from each hand by putting one projectile between each 2 fingers. It was with fervent dedication that Naruto paid attention to the ponytailed Anbu, whom had just recently moved into the cabin on training ground number 46 with him. To him, only a few people had paid any sort of positive attention to him, with most others opting to either scorn him, glare at him, or ignore him, with a few more bolder people beating him on the occasion, particularly on festivals when there were large numbers of people together and under the influence, and one idle-spoken thought of the demon brat could set off a riot. That somebody was actually not only giving him positive attention, but also helping him in something, anything, was something he latched onto right away, unwilling to let go. So long as it did not infringe upon the survival instincts he had developed over the last 5 years, he would do anything Itachi-sensei asked of him and listen carefully to what he said so as not to disappoint the raven-haired Anbu. And so he took Itachi's advice into consideration after he collected up his kunai. Correcting his stance by adjusting it ever so slightly, he kept a focused gaze on the target 20 meters dead ahead and inclined above his head at about a 20-degree angle. Letting instinct do the job of calculating the effects of angle, distance, air pressure, the direction and velocity of the slight breeze, he let the kunai fly with its own slender grace and was rewarded with a loud thunk that indicated the blade going in significantly deeper than all his previous tries. A quick glance brought a gleeful look to his face, the sunlight glistening off his hair and the sheen of his sweat on his forehead, making the impression of the bright smile even more intense. Hopefully the fact that his kunai was only a sliver away from being dead center would impress his new sensei. The man in question was in fact impressed and let it show, having slightly understood that trying to remain his normal stoic-faced self would only damper the enthusiasm that Naruto had for learning the shinobi arts. Seeing that Naruto had the form for throwing a weapon mostly down, he decided to finish this portion up for the day, leaving the boy's body time enough to recover and for muscle memory to be ingrained. Besides, if what he suspected was true, he might need the rest of the day to keep up with his new apprentice anyways. Naruto-san, he said, not at all nonplussed by the complete informality of this odd sensei-student relationship, that's it for weapons training for the day. Go put away your kunes and come back right after. All he got in response was a quick short bow and a loudly exclaimed "Hi, Itachi-sensei." Before the boy ran off. Oh yes, he would be a legendary shinobi indeed. When he came back, Itachi indicated for him to sit down. The younger of the two took to sitting cross-legged on the verdure grass, while the older sat in a compassed position on a nearby stump, as if he were at a fireside chat. Now, Naruto-san, what do you know exactly about chakra energy? Tell me everything you can think of about it. Naruto scrunched his face up in concentration. Up until now, he had never really had an education of any sort that wasn't learned on the streets. Nevertheless, between his short, brief conversations with the Kyuubi since their first meeting and his occasional chats with the old man Hokage, he had gathered a meager understanding of the concept of chakra. Chakra comes from mixing your spiritual energy with your physical energy. You can use this chakra to perform jutsus, and that's about all I know. Itachi refrained from sighing, knowing all too well how badly a 5-year-old could react if he took the sigh the wrong way. Still, at least Naruto understood the very basic idea of chakra and it was something he could build off of. He started off telling Naruto as much, then launched into a more in-depth explanation. So yes, chakra does use physical and spiritual energy. Your body and its fitness and age is what is considered physical energy, so a person with lots of stamina will likely have more chakra than a person who becomes fatigued more easily. On the other end of the spectrum, your intelligence along with your mental experiences makes up spiritual energy. Your body under normal circumstances combines the two automatically into chakra. To be able to use more chakra, you must train both body and mind. The most important thing is that by using your chakra, your body will be forced to replenish it and automatically ups the amount of capacity that it can have. You, on the other hand, at this point focusing his gaze solely on Naruto to drive home the point, with the fair hair flinching slightly under his onyx eyes, you have two additional ways of increasing this chakra capacity, both of which are automatic. From my discussions with the Kyuubi, it appears that the seal that imprisons him causes some of his demonic chakra, more commonly known as yokai, to leak out into your own chakra system. The amount that does is a very small fraction, but what does get out, for lack of a better technical term, pushes on your own chakra reserves, and the two have to counterbalance. The chakra and yokai that counterbalance will be lost from your system, but both will regenerate itself through natural processes. However, the Nine Tails actually permanently loses yokai from the other process that the seal has. It forces yokai to be converted into chakra, which then permanently expands your own chakra reserves. Pausing to allow Naruto to mull over his words and noticing him hanging over his every word, Itachi continued, that brings us to your chakra system. Think of your chakra system in terms of your circulatory system. You have a central organ, the heart, which pumps out blood through the arteries, and the blood after serving its purpose, returns to the heart through the veins. Much akin to your arteries and vein, chakra is delivered throughout the body via a series of chakra coils. The length of your coils will grow over time with your body, but the width will increase ever so microscopically every time it needs to, although even that is restricted by your body size. In comparison to the heart, however, there are actually 8 different points in your body, often referred to as the 8 gates, where your reserves are stored. While the chakra is in your body, you can manipulate your chakra and release it through points called tenketsus, of which there are 361 such points on the body. The Hyuga clan's Dojutsu allows them to see these tenketsus, and they can also use their own chakra to block off the points, which can be very devastating. However, in your particular case, there are some problems. Over the past 5 years, between natural growth, the yokai pushing on your own reserves, and the actual absorption of the Kyuubi's yokai, your chakra reserves have become extraordinarily large. Depending on whether your parents were themselves shinobis or not, you may have been gifted with naturally large reserves, demonic influence aside. Because of this, your body has had to constantly adjust to be able to contain all that chakra. I estimate that you probably have enough chakra to rival a chibi, the one-tailed tanuki. Although I do not have experimental evidence, it theoretically makes sense that your chakra is, again for lack of a better term, far denser than the average person's, simply because it only has a finite amount of space to fit in. In addition to that, my Sharingan eyes allow me to see chakra flow to a minimal degree, and it simply astounds me your body is producing so much chakra that it is literally leaking out of your body. Once you hit a growth spurt you should be able to get a hold on that, as the length of your coils will increase in size, and hence have an easier time of it, but I believe that after a while your chakra capacity will catch up and cause the same problems all over again. Hence, you will have to regularly expend chakra until it stops leaking before you can even have a chance at controlling it. Unfortunately, you will probably end up having to do this every day until we find a solution to this. Itachi took this time to stop talking for twofold purposes. The first was to let Naruto digest the information, as some of it was a bit on the technical side. The second, to his undying shame, was because he was nearly red in the face from having to speak so much. He simply wasn't used to lecturing for so long without pause, and he was furthermore part of a clan that he sometimes felt had a genetic predisposition to respond to everything with short to-the-point grunts. After having caught a breath and letting his jaw cool down a bit, he carried onwards after pinning part of his cloak underneath his arm to better protect himself from a strong breeze that was passing by. This also means that until your out of whack chakra growth stops, you will probably never be able to perform any low-grade jutsu that requires a significant amount of chakra control. Before I teach you anything else, however, you'll need to be able to actually use your chakra. Normally, it would take you weeks if not months of meditation to be able to do so, to attain that feeling of being able to reach into your body and pulling out energy for your own use. However, much like I said before, your chakra is literally leaking from your body, so you should have a much easier time of following it. The best method to start off is to meditate. Lots of people have funny concepts about medication, such as having to sit cross-legged, or keeping your body rigid, or clenching your hands together. All you really need to do is to be sitting down in a comfortable position. Yes, laying down suffices, and keeping all your muscles in a relaxed state. From there, you have to clear your mind of your 5 senses. The best way for a beginner to filter them out is by thinking about something and then letting your mind drift off from there. For an example of what I mean, look at that tree over there. I'm thinking about the tree and noting that the leaves are a bright green. I then think about how springtime is coming to a close based off the hue of the leaves and how the Kyubi festival was a few days ago. Obviously that's not a string of thoughts you would go off of, but carrying on, I would then gush over the various stands at the festival selling Pocky. Yes, I'm a Pocky addict much like you love your ramen, and then think about how I should get some Pocky later on tonight. Then I'd be thinking about whether I should get strawberry or chocolate Pocky. By this time, you've noticed I've completely gone astray from my initial thoughts, and by then, my senses aren't quite as keen. Once you've picked up on the fact that you've stopped paying attention to the surroundings, you should quickly slow down your thoughts. Close your eyes, ignore your hearing and smelling, and purge your mind of any thinking. After a short while, you should pick up a sort of flow to your body, not quite unlike the passage of blood throughout your circulatory system, but you can inwardly feel it as opposed to having to put a finger in your hand to feel for a pulse. When that occurs, you'll have to try to dam up the flow or push on it to make it move faster. Once you can successfully do that even once, you'll instinctually be able to manipulate chakra and we can go on to the next part of the lesson. Itachi was glad to finally be able to get onto the practical part of the lecture, as he was beginning to feel a bit of a sore jaw from so much talking, and Naruto's yawn indicated that he was struggling to keep interested in so much theory. It took a couple of hours, but Naruto was finally able to do it. The first time he felt the flow of chakra within his body, the sheer sensation of it startled him out of his trance. Thankfully, the second time he began meditating, it took him only 5 minutes of meditating to clear his mind of all thoughts and another 5 to feel the chakra flow. This time, he experimentally did what could only be best described as flexing the chakra flow and excitedly got to trying to actually manipulate it. This time, he was knocked out of the odd state of being by his frustration when he had been unable to actually do anything. The third time was the charm. Once he managed to feel his chakra, he did something weird that felt like nudging it, which returned an odd sensation to his brain. He took the initiative and built off the action of the nudge, and there it was. With some experimentation, he managed to stem and quicken the flow and even cause a slight pulse to the movement. Itachi was able to sense the slight disturbance in his pupil's chakra flow as well, but was more amazed at how quickly Naruto had managed to manipulate his chakra. Most people took weeks or months to do such a thing, and were it not for his previous theories on how much easier it would be for Naruto to manipulate it, he would have thought it flat out impossible or believed Naruto to be a kami amongst geniuses. Even taking into factor his guesswork, he still believed it would have taken at least double the time it actually required. Shaking off his thoughts, leaving them to linger for later, he spoke up, bringing Naruto out of his reverie. Well then, it seems that you've managed to reach within yourself and use your chakra. That brings us to the next part, actual chakra manipulation. As I've mentioned before, chakra is a form of energy created by your body through the mixing of physical and spiritual energies. On its own, it is merely that a form of energy. The best you might do is to just release all your chakra and cause it to heat your surroundings, possibly blowing up. He took a breath, going into the next part of the lecture. Over time, nobody really knows how they managed it. Ninjas developed a system of 12 hand symbols, also known as hand seals, that allow us to manipulate the flow of chakra, named after 12 animals, and several seals can be strung together to perform jutsus. Each hand seal has its own properties to it. For example, the Tora hand seal is affiliated with the fire element and hence is the last seal used in basically every fire element jutsu. The snake hand seal is often associated with deception and illusion, so many genjutsus and other illusionary techniques will have at least one snake hand seal thrown in there. Naruto leaned forward as Itachi did a demonstration of a hand seal, clenching all 4 fingers on his left hand while pointing his thumb upwards, with his right ring finger and pinky overlapping his left in the middle, index and thumb all pointing up. This is the Ram seal, which has several uses. However, what I want you to use it for right now is to channel forth your chakra. When you do this, it will be raw, unadulterated chakra, and it will escape from your tenketsus. The visibility and feel to it will tell me how much chakra you have and the amount of pressure there is to it. Itachi picked himself up from his position on the stump and, indicating to Naruto to stay where he was, walked back approximately 10 meters. He was no fool, and if Naruto's chakra levels truly were what he suspected them to be, he would need to take care to stay out of the immediate vicinity. He shouted out to the young lad, "Put your hands together in the Ram seal while feeling your chakra, let it out, then drop the seal after about 10 seconds. He almost immediately regretted stepping back only 10 meters as his knees grew weak with the strength of the first wave of chakra that washed over him. Thank God that the seals on this training ground prevent anyone outside from feeling this, or else I'd have a squad of Anbu here within minutes. The second wave of energy caused him to stagger backwards, while the third wave sent him down to his knees. Okay, if I ever spar against him, I have to stay away until he exhausts his outermost layer of reserves. By the fourth wave, the time had expired and Naruto stopped his Ram seal. Seeing his new sensei on the ground with his hands clenched deep into the earth, he ran forward in alarm, shouting out, "Itachi-sensei, are you alright?" Itachi replied in favor, "I'm alright, but thank you for the concern." Getting up, he swept the grass and dirt off from his cloak and allowed his analytical mind to take over. That first wave of chakra had been very intense, but the second wave not quite as intense, but still intense, and the third wave weaker still. Rolling it over in his head, he came to the conclusion that Naruto's chakra coils must have forced out as much chakra as possible in those 3 bursts to alleviate the pressure caused by having so much chakra to begin with. Applying it in battle, his first few jutsus, if he could control his chakra at all, would have that pressure behind it, meaning the beginning of a fight would be where he could cause the most damage. He said as much to Naruto, who soaked up the concept like a sponge and began bouncing around at the idea of having such a massive amount of power. "Calm down, Naruto," Itachi scolded. Naruto, not wishing to disappoint his sensei, stopped, red lighting up his face as he understood how foolish he had acted. Standing at attention, he listened as Itachi carried on, "Now, as I was saying, your chakra system is a mess, but you should be able to fix up most of your problems if you let out as much chakra as you can a couple of times a day, much like you just did there." He paused, trying to figure out the best way to say what was coming next before deciding to just fess up. "However, even if you can get rid of most of the excess chakra, your control will still have problems because of its density and what's left of the pressure. I simply cannot help you there because even the simplest exercise I know for helping with that will still be too difficult for you to do. That will be left up to your other human sensei, Ibisu, who you will meet in a few days. He is far more capable with helping you with that sort of thing than I am." Naruto sighed, in disappointment at his incapability to tap into the power that Itachi had just told him he had, and in frustration at his glee having been led on like that. Itachi, seeing that Naruto needed a pick-me-up, continued, "Cheer up, Naruto. I can still teach you any jutsu that doesn't require any control whatsoever, and in fact, considering just how much chakra you have and the state of your studies, I have the perfect jutsu for you." Naruto perked up at this as he saw Itachi form his hands into another hand seal. "This is a Tora hand seal, here," he moved each index finger into a cross position, "and this is an adjusted Tora hand seal used exclusively for a kinjutsu known as the Kage Bunshin no Jutsu." With a poof sound and a wisp of smoke, there was a second Itachi standing right next to the first. Naruto couldn't help but gape in awe. To him, it was truly a remarkable technique, especially when both Itachis spontaneously poked him on the forehead. The Bunshin was not an illusion, but was solid. How? He stuttered, unused to such a phenomenon. A smirk crossed Itachi's features, the 2 lines on his cheeks crinkling ever so slightly. "The wonders of chakra, it makes you wonder how the civilians can live their mundane day-to-day lives without the excitement of the techniques one can do with chakra." Now, the Kage Bunshin is known as a kinjutsu, or a forbidden jutsu. Ninjutsus are that way for a good reason, as they can have bad side effects, or require a sacrifice of sorts, or are used for malicious purposes. In the case of the Kage Bunshin, the cost of summoning them is so great that usually only those of Jonin levels can summon them, and to reinforce them to take more than one hit consumes even more chakra. For you, however, it'll be a pittance. In fact, I dare say that unless you gain perfect chakra control, you will never be able to perform the regular Bunshin without going overkill on the number you make. Additionally, every time you summon one you split a small part of your soul to make it. It isn't quite as bad as I make it sound, there isn't any adverse effect because of that, and as a result Kage Bunshins are able to act independently and think on their own. The real reason that it is considered a kinjutsu, however, is that when you dispel a Kage Bunshin, the piece of soul returns to you, and along with it, all the memories of that piece's lifetime away from you. In other words, if your Kage Bunshin was to read a book and then be dispelled, you would remember reading that book and its contents. With only a few Kage Bunshins the effect isn't that bad, but if you were to dispel a dozen Kage Bunshins all at once, your brain would have to compile through all of the memories all at once. In other words, mental overload. Seeking to both shoot down some of Naruto's false hopes and build up others that lie deep underneath the surface, he pressed on quickly. In your case, since you are only 5 years old and have already had a large-scale mental change with Kyuubi filling your brain with the ability to read, write, and talk, you will need to take it even more lightly than usual. With practice, you can increase the pace you can keep up with information. For the first little while, do not use them for training purposes at all. Instead, set them to mundane purposes while you live out here, such as gathering firewood, doing dishes, or cooking your ramen, although it is your own physical entity that must eat the ramen to sustain yourself. You cannot have a Kage Bunshin do that. If you are reading a book, be sure to only read for about an hour before dispelling the Kage Bunshin. Eventually, as your ability to tolerate new information increases, as well as being able to filter out more mundane memories, you can use it for actual training. You can use them to read and understand multiple scrolls at once. You can set them on chakra control exercises and speed up the results 10 times as quickly. You can spar with them and fix any flaws and inconsistencies in your movements. You cannot, however, use them to improve your physical body, nor your reflexes or muscle memory. That you must do entirely on your own. Besides ninjutsu and jinjutsu, I will also eventually teach you in the arts of kenjutsu. I will not teach you any style of taijutsu, instead, I will show you how to move your body around with maximum efficiency and minimal effort and train your reflexes and muscle memories. However, before I even do that, you must train your own body. Thanks to the Kyuubi's yokai and its regenerative powers, you should have kami-like stamina, and whenever you exercise and train your body, you will build muscle and bone mass far quicker than the normal person. Of course, I realize you have not been fed very well over the past 5 years, so I will be obtaining groceries at least once a week and you will be eating something other than ramen. Your body needs protein to build muscle, it needs calcium and other minerals, and it needs even more calories to keep up with the pace I'll be setting you through. Having finished outlining his own duties and teaching Naruto, he motioned towards Naruto to stand up and get ready for some practical work. Itachi showed the modified Tora hand seal to Naruto again, who copied the gesture. After a bit more elaboration on what he should feel, Naruto went through the hand seal and let his chakra pulse out. The first few times, nothing occurred except for a heaviness weighing down on him ever so slightly. When he brought this up with his sensei, Itachi informed him that he was giving off a large amount of chakra with each attempt and that the heaviness was a result of his body losing large amounts of chakra all at once, although the side effects would be worse if he were to actually approach having little chakra instead of just losing lots of it at once. The Anbu captain adjusted his hand seals a couple of times to fix small mistakes and had him rest for a few minutes before attempting it again. It was a weird feeling for him this time around. As soon as he let go of his chakra, his feet seemed to be as light as a feather and a small measure of warmth enveloped his feet. The feeling extended up his body until it exited out the top of his head, leaving his whole body feeling weightless and yet at the same time full of energy and brimming with life before the warmth of it all left him. Looking around, he was surprised when he saw more than 20 clones of him, white shirt and black pants and sandals and all, identical down to the tag on the back of his tee. A second later, Itachi flickered in and out of existence, with smoke filling the area. A flood of memories enveloped Naruto's mind for a split second before he shook his head to get rid of the small buzzing sound in his ears. Although he remembered each of his clones getting killed by a punch or kick, their 5-second lifetime and similar deaths all blended together so it wasn't so painful to recall. So this was what Itachi meant by the side effects not being so bad when the memories were of a more mundane value. The man in question allowed a small smirk to cross his face, not allowing anything uncharacteristic to cross the shadows of his lips. As he brushed his hair with his hand, fingers twitching in his ponytail, he proceeded to praise Naruto. "Well then, you managed to make 20 kg bunchins after only a few tries. Well done. Most genin would be hard-pressed to make more than 3 at the apex of their time in the lower ranks, and it's a rare gift indeed to be able to succeed in doing a jutsu on your 3rd attempt." He was pleased to see the smile cross Naruto's face, before being slightly disturbed as he realized the boy's whiskers and the slightly feral trusses of his hair made the smile a bit too close to a fox's for his liking. Brushing it off as a side effect of being the Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi no Kitsune, he then continued on to the last matter for the day. That said, that's enough talk about chakra. Their body hasn't had the right kind of exercise to help it develop. Running around and scurrying through alleys is not the right kind, and I intend to correct that. Needless to say, Naruto soon realized why Uchiha Itachi was claimed as a prodigal genius. It wasn't because he was born talented or because he had a strong Sharingan, but because he pushed himself beyond his limits. In the short training exercise that followed, he was utterly ruthless. He had Naruto going through push-ups, sit-ups, jumping jacks, and more complicated maneuvers all day long, giving him only brief periods of rest before dousing him off with a small suit and jutsu. He called it off after 2 hours, however, noting that in his current malnourished state, he shouldn't do too much exercise. It was in the cabin that Naruto thought about his new life. The last thing he had remembered that fateful night was entering the Kyuubi's chamber with Itachi and Hokage, only to be banished within the second. When he woke up, he found out that he had been whisked away to a secret training ground and had been lying in a bed in the cabin there. The man in the weasel mask, who he had learned to be Uchiha Itachi, had made it very clear at the beginning that he was not like other Uchiha and did not hate or dislike him, though he admittedly held a healthy amount of fear for him because of his status as a Jinchuriki. He was to train him, he was to feed him, he was to help him ever so steadily reintegrate back into society after that incident at the Kyuubi festival. The Sandaime clearly trusted the Anbu captain, so he would trust him as well. Naruto understood all too well that he was to foster and develop his skills as a shinobi, and so he would go along with it, so long as it could help him achieve his end goal of cutting down on the suffering many people had to go through. It was a strange sort of irony. A ninja was supposed to do several things such as assassination, kidnappings, and sabotage, but depending on the intended consequences and the motivations, one could ignore the darkness of the business and make the best out of it. He would try his best to seem loyal to Konoha for now and use any position that he might gain here to do what he could. He was ambitious, but also had to admit that he was ignorant. He had no idea whatsoever whether Konoha was one of few or one of many or even the only village that at least tried to embody the same ideals he held. Sure, while walking through the streets he had been either ignored or glared at with malicious intent, had received the occasional beating at the orphanage for what were unfair reasons, and on festival days and Saturdays, often had to stick to the shadows to avoid drunk people who had gotten it into their heads to hunt him down, with the recent attack being one of the few times where they actually tried to kill him, but he was the only one to be forced into such a fate. Otherwise, the orphanages were well funded, many of the kids were quickly adopted, the streets were kept cleaned up, and he had only twice seen homeless people. For Naruto, he simply didn't know whether this was the case with every community or if Konoha was a diamond in the rough. He had shunted aside these concerns for later, feeling quickly that he would be unable to click on Itachi in the way that was needed to bring such a matter up with him. For now, he would let it rest until he found someone else to talk to about it. However, it was that first night that he had woken up suddenly in a cold sweat as a thought had spontaneously crossed his mind while sleeping. The demon that was sealed within him was Kyuubi, the nine-tailed fox, who was said to be the greatest of all Biju. Did that mean that there were 8 other individuals out there that suffered the same burden as him? Perhaps there were even more who had the same fate but had demons that weren't of the Biju class. Even if his earlier concerns about regular people were unfounded, he couldn't help shake the worrying feeling he had for his possible fellow Jinchuriki. The next few weeks passed with little incident for Naruto, who had been all but cut off from the outside world, Itachi his only companion. The Kyuubi hadn't yet gotten in touch with him since that destined day, but he had a sinking feeling that he would soon come face to face once more with the Kitsune Lord. Itachi promised him that he would soon meet his third sensei, but for then, he forced Naruto to eat incrementally larger amounts of foodstuffs daily, purge his system of large amounts of chakra daily, and work him through steadily harsher exercises. After the first few days, he had shown Naruto how to stretch his body and warm up every joint and skeletal muscle. Since then, Naruto had steadily begun to progress in Itachi's teachings over how to keep his body in a constant state of readiness so he could recoil and pounce at a moment's instance without needing to pause and get his body into position first. Eventually, the day came where Itachi was called out to take on a mission for Anbu, interrupting his undercover assignment that he was supposedly engaged in to explain his whereabouts whilst he lived with Naruto. Before Itachi had gone off, he had brought in Ibisu and introduced the two, debriefing Ibisu on all the details of his and Kyuubi's arrangements, specifically mentioning that Naruto was in contact with the fox so that the tutor wouldn't receive any nasty surprises when he worked with Naruto. Ibisu was unique, to say the least. Most Fire Country ninja wore light clothing, but Ibisu practically ignored the local climate and took to wearing dark blue high-collar cotton shirts. Naruto couldn't understand why he would do that in contrast with a smarter choice of sunglasses and matching dark blue bandana. Before leaving, Itachi told him to make a good impression with his new sensei, noting that Ibisu was far more of a stickler than he was for respect, and Naruto took the Uchiha's words to heart. He paid attention to his honorifics, stood at attention whenever being spoken to, and did whatever Ibisu asked without complaint, although he would often ask for elaboration on why he needed to do certain things whenever he couldn't understand the importance of them. When Ibisu assigned him scrolls and books to read overnight, as he, unlike Itachi, did not stay long-term at the cabin, preferring to stay at his own apartment, Naruto would read them over with an analytical eye, often doing it twice, taking advantage of the Kage Bunshin. While Naruto was doing his best to match up to and exceed his sensei's expectations from the first day onwards, the Takebetsu Jonin had been flabbergasted. Truthfully, the main reason he had taken on Naruto as a new pupil was to get on the good side of the Hokage, who promised him that if he did a good job with Naruto, he would be under serious consideration for being the future private tutor for Sarutobi's new grandson Konohamaru. He promised himself he would sacrifice whatever peace of mind he would need to give up to make it through teaching the demon brat, but he hadn't expected Uzumaki Naruto to be so cordial. The boy never blew up like he expected him to when he had ridiculed his chakra control. It was true that he had become frustrated at his inability to hold a leaf on his forehead for longer than 3 seconds, even after Ibisu had cleared him for using a few Kage Bunshins to cut down on the training time, but that had been understandable when he realized just how much chakra Naruto had. With an amount that surpassed that of most cages and the density of what was left, it would take a miracle to get a hold on it right away, and so he had set about to forcing Naruto to flush out even more chakra from his system every day to ever so slightly increase the chances of improving his control. He had begun to wonder, just why was it surprising that Naruto acted how he did? His mind had wandered over this reaction of his several times. He had originally been in the interrogation section, but had changed his field of expertise from interrogation to teaching for two reasons. The first reason was that he had felt more at home with teaching the younger generation, but the second reason was more shameful for him. His superiors had deemed him far too impressionable and too easily swayed into another person's line of thinking, and it was a quality that the interrogation and torture departments simply couldn't afford to allow. He had yet to crush that character flaw of his, and so when conversation came up that involved Uzumaki Naruto, and the whispers brought dislike bordering on hatred, their opinion had become his opinion. Perhaps this was why the Hokage had asked him to teach the vessel of the Kyuubi no Kitsune to see the real Uzumaki Naruto, and not the Uzumaki Naruto that had been generated by the false words of others who themselves relied on second-hand or third-hand sources, or just outright testimonies. It was a bit of a shock to Ebisu that it was working, but he still was unsure of to his own personal view on the boy. It wasn't until Naruto had worked up the courage to ask a question that he managed to sort it out himself. "Nah, Ebisu, might I ask a question?" It was requested in such an innocent tone during the middle of an idle downtime that Ebisu immediately acknowledged the request and motioned for Naruto to go ahead and ask. "Oh no, why do people hate me if I'm not the Kyuubi, but just its jailer?" It was certainly not what Ebisu had been expecting, and he froze up. Naruto had quickly panicked when his sensei hadn't responded for 5 full minutes and was about to prod him when Ebisu finally answered, "Well, Naruto-kun, there are several different layers of answers to that question. You must realize that the Kyuubi never actually once touched Konohagakure itself, as it was stopped 30 miles out by the Yondaime Hokage. However, on its way here, it left a path of destruction that killed several thousand and completely razed multiple towns in South Hai no Kuni. Furthermore, over 300 shinobi lost their life that night, including Namikaze Minato, the Yondaime himself, who was almost worshipped by civilians and ninjas of Konoha alike. With their hero dead, you must understand that they needed a scapegoat, and unfortunately that scapegoat was you. However, even then, I suspect most everyone would eventually get over it, but that was not the main problem. You see, even though the Kyuubi was stopped 30 miles out, it still radiated such power and killing intent that it struck fear into the hearts of people still in Konoha at the time. Many sick and elderly passed away that night from the stress caused by that fear, despite no direct interaction with the Kyuubi no Kitsune. Every single person that lived in Konoha that night felt that fear. It was like a bolt of ice that struck you in the heart, paralyzing you, freezing you in place, unable to move. I was 15 at the time, and newly promoted chunin. Against that monster, I was nothing. Ebisu suppressed a shiver as his mind dredged up his own memories of the Kyuubi's attack. Even after 5 years, the impression that such power had left on his psyche had only barely begun to fade. And you know, I believe that you can find most people's reason for their pathological fear right there. We are a shinobi village, a military institution. The sheer power and aura that the Nine Tails exuded even from so far away struck fear in those of us who had trained from birth to overcome fear, and they hated it. They hate you because that power is sealed within you, and what they can't understand, they fear, they see as a threat. Namikaze Minato, the Yondaime Hokage, was seen as a master of seals. It was his Hiraishin no Jutsu that practically won the third great shinobi war for us against Iwagakure. If anyone were to design a seal that could perfectly contain the greatest of all Bijuu, it would be him. But that's the problem, only he understands the seal. Even Jiraiya-sama and Hokage-sama, both highly accomplished connoisseurs of seals in their own rights, can't understand just what the Yondaime did in that seal, so nobody knows what exactly it does. Ebisu left Naruto to think over that while he was re-evaluating his own opinion on the boy. Kami help him, he realized he had let his impressionable nature get to him, and it might have caused him to scorn an innocent young boy whom had been nothing but a model student, cordial, quiet, but naturally curious and with an unquenchable passion to learn and improve. The night after that conversation, he went to the Sandaime and asked for clearance on the rest of Naruto's profile, beyond his psyche profile, and with the notable exception of a few pieces of information that were ranked as SS class state secrets, had gained access to his files. What he saw shocked him. Naruto's medical file was almost 3 inches thick, a file size that most retired shinobi don't obtain, the result of a mob mentality that had taken over Konoha 5 years ago. Deep down, Ebisu resolved to no longer let his natural biases get in the way of his judgment, having just seen the consequences of doing so. From the seeds of that conversation sprouted Ebisu's grudging respect towards Naruto for having had to put up with that proverbial crap for so long. He began putting forth that extra bit of dedication that he had felt missing from all his times teaching in the past, and it paid off with surplus as Naruto began to grow like a weed under his guidance, eventually attaining moderate success in holding a leaf onto his forehead, then moving on to holding 2 and then 3 and 4 leaves at the same time onto various spots on his body, then being able to spin the leaf on his forehead. At the same time, he taught Naruto about the general world around them, of the elemental nations and the hidden villages, of the civilian and shinobi lives, and the history of the past and present of the Leaf Village. Perhaps the turning point in their relationship was when Ibisu was one day at the bookstore subtlety going through the Icha Icha series section, occasionally sneaking a look and leafing through a few pages, while trying to avoid being witnessed by anyone he knew, not wishing for his reputation to be established as being amorous. While going through, he found a lone copy of the first book ever written by Jiraiya of the Sannin, one that had nothing to do with sex and romance, as all of Jiraiya's later novels were. Taking a chance, he purchased it and read it over that night. The legend of the gutsy ninja was inspiring even to him, a full-grown man, and so he gave it to Naruto to read. Naruto, who had rarely received gifts, took it and devoured it within the hour. And then he read it again. And then again. After the fourth time reading it, he couldn't help but feel a sense of kinship with the main character, whom was also named Naruto, and he felt his ambitions and desires solidify. His relationship with Ibisu improved even further, and he decided that one day he would like to meet the man who authored the legend of the gutsy ninja, Jiraiya of the Sannin. It was a couple of weeks after that day of reckoning that Naruto felt himself being pulled into his mindscape after he had fallen asleep. Traversing the hallways of his gutter mind, not being old enough or versed enough in slang to attempt a self-deprecating joke to himself, he came to the chamber of the king of kitsunes. The water that had been ankle-deep the last time he came had receded ever so slightly, and the darkness of the sewers had retreated some more, signs of his new life bringing back some form of mental stability. As soon as he stepped into that giant chamber room, however, it all came crashing down on him. He was the vessel for the soul of the Kyuubi no Kitsune, a demon that had destroyed and slaughtered, massacred and killed. His body bore the weight of another, with the blood of tens of thousands on his hands. He couldn't help what he did next, as his consciousness locked itself up and he sat down, curled up in a fetal position, trembling in the damp waters. The fox saw this happen and began to worry. It wouldn't do for the ninja it was sealed into to suddenly have his mental frame of being shattered just like that. The first time they had met, he had gotten a freebie ride, since the gaki needed companionship of some sorts, and was naive to the full weight of just what the fox was and what his presence meant. He had stayed out of the gaki's life for the last few weeks to let him heal and come to terms with what he was, a Jinchuriki, before calling him back in. Clearly, however, he was losing the battle, but he wouldn't let the mortal just go like that. "Oi, gaki. Snap out of it." His pleading call worked to a degree as Naruto's trembling form began to calm down and his head began to rise up from his legs. Seeing his ministrations working, the fox continued on, "You said before you wanted to prevent others from living the same life as you have, but how are you going to do that if you just sit there and cry and shut yourself away from the world like that?" The catcall managed to provoke Naruto enough that he stood up with indignation present in his stance, only to realize what he had done. "My apologies for that, Kyuubi Dono," he said, making sure to nurse his healthy fear of the fox. Well, he understood that the fox was at his mercy for the next 9 years, the past 2 weeks had revitalized him and brought back his own desire to live, so he was definitely willing to be respectful to the Kitsune demon, though the Yauko had a while back requested to be called by the lesser honorific Dono. Thinking over what he just said and what Itachi had told him about his and Kyuubi's chat, he let his face light up in a fox-like grin and added, "Or would you prefer Kyuubi-sensei?" "Kyuubi Dono will do fine," the fox demon said, intent on having his container get used to it by force of habit, having plotted for the years ahead on how he would groom another servant. So far, on the outside world his container was improving his physical condition, along with getting more nutrients and energy into his body, and his recent acquisition of knowledge was pleasing. It would not do for Kyuubi's status to be reflected by a weakling. Meanwhile, on the inside, Kyuubi had been examining the seal that imprisoned him within that ninja's son. When he had first looked it over, he was impressed at how the Namikaze seal master had truly looked over at every possible outcome. While the Kyuubi retained almost no control over the mortal he was sealed inside of and could not stop his yokai from being absorbed, he could, with permission from the gaki, send a small continuous amount of his yokai into the gaki's chakra coils. That would be something that he would talk about in a few years, though. For now, he thought it best if he bring Uzumaki Naruto into the fold of the clan by talking about history. In any case, your 2 new senseis on the outside plane of existence have been teaching you these last 2 weeks and you no doubt by now have seen the improvements and results. From now on, every night while your physical body is sleeping, you will be here in the mindscape with me, learning whatever I feel at the time that you need to know. Because your mindscape does not exactly follow physical laws, time can vary and you can push it up to about an hour in here being only 3 seconds outside. Therefore, I can teach you for more than just a couple of hours nightly." Seeing Naruto nod at the end of every sentence that he understood, the fox carried on, allowing his eyes to move around erratically. "For tonight, I will not be teaching you anything about that really relates to the shinobi arts. Instead, I will speak about something that heavily relates to you. The history of the Biju. For time eternity, the realm of demons, known as Makai, and this realm, the realm of Uninjins and other beings, were separated. In addition, there were also two more divine realms, Kami's realm and the Shinigami's realm. When a ninja dies, typically the Shinigami comes and takes their soul away. A rare few of extraordinary greatness are invited into Kami's realm. Ninjas come and go in the blink of an eye, causing the majority of the work for the Shinigami. The Kyuubi no Kitsune paused, his tail swishing behind his rear in an agitated manner, the expression on his vulpine features almost wistful. In Makai, however, demons are essentially immortal. With age we only grow more powerful, as opposed to growing old and dying. Ninjas cannot kill a demon on their own. That is why they seal them away in others, to prevent them from causing havoc in the mortal realm. There are only 3 ways to kill a demon. The first is at the hands of another demon or weapons imbued with demonic or divine power. If you ever sign a summoning contract in your lifetime, you will find when fighting other summons that a summons will not die by your hand, leastways not unless you choose to become a part demon, something that is possible with my presence, but can die at the hands of another summons. The second, and here, he focused his gaze on Naruto to emphasize his next point, is to seal a demon into a human being. Some seals won't work, but any seal that forces the souls of the sealed and the vessel to intertwine will kill the demon when the opposite dies. Something akin to a shiver passed through the fox's spine, and for a being as large as it was, the shiver was visible as indicated by an intense vibration along its backside. And the third way is to summon the Shinigami itself. To be honest, I never thought that was possible for a mere human to do, but Namikaze Minato was the first to do so, and for such a thing he deserves my respect. Much like I said before, the Shikifujin was not permanent on me, as the amount of power the Shinigami puts on it is only proportional to the chakra and life force the user can offer up as a sacrifice. Namikaze was smart, too. Under normal circumstances, that Kenjutsu would have caused both his and my soul to be devoured by the Shinigami and stuck us in his stomach for an untold amount of time, although not eternity as the Sandaime thought it did. Realizing he was going off track, the fox snapped back to attention. In any case, Makai is separated from the Ninkai realm. While demons are allowed to cross over, any demon that has over a quarter of tail of power will be stripped of any extra power permanently, which is kept in effect even if they come back to Makai. They can still gain power while in the Ninkai realm, however, which is why there are a number of minor lesser demons running around. It is an edict passed down by the gods who govern over the 2 realms of the living, so as to not cause chaos in this world. If that law were not in place, demons would have long ago ravaged this world. Humans, however, cannot go to Makai unless they wish to face certain death, and the means of getting there is far more inconvenient than it is for a demon to leave Makai. However, about 1,000 years ago, Kami finally intervened just once. He took the souls of 9 recently deceased animal spirits from the mortal realm and changed them into demons that could go between the 2 realms without having to sacrifice a specific amount of power. The 9 of us all become tailed demons of ascending order, starting with the 1-tailed Tanuki and ending with me, the 9-tailed fox. That is not to say that is our fixed amount of power, however. In the demon realm, the 1-tailed Tanuki actually has the equivalent of about 15 tails of power, but when he comes here, he can only keep 1 tail, but if he returned to Makai, he would have all 15 tails of power again. We are different because we can travel back and forth without all the rules. We 9 were the founders of 9 great demon clans in Makai, which are different from the remaining clans because we all draw off the characteristics of our original body. For example, the Ichibi was once a raccoon, but his demonization caused some characteristics to change around to become a similar but different entity. I suppose that was somewhat vague, so a better example would be me. I am often called a 9-tailed fox, but that would be inaccurate. I am not a fox, but a kitsune. While we greatly resemble foxes, we are not, as we have the ability to grow multiple tails. There are no non-demonic kitsunes, and there are no demonic foxes. A fox that is changed into a demon will become a kitsune, but it is not simply a fox made a demon. Nevertheless, us kitsunes still feel great kinship with foxes, so you will tend to take on some of the features of a fox, such as those 6 whiskers on your cheek. Back to business, we are the only ones able to cross between the 2 realms with impunity. That is what makes us the Biju, the feared tailed beasts of this realm. Kami made us the Biju for a reason, though. 1,000 years ago, humans had no idea how to use chakra. Seeing the look of shock cross Naruto's face, the Kyuubi allowed a devilish grin to cross his own. That is right. We were the ones who brought about the dawn of the age of chakra. Monks, shinobi and samurai alike all grew out of the dark age of humanity. We were the one whom gave the sage of the 6 paths, the Rakuto Sennin, his powers. We were the ones who taught him how to use his powers, which he handed to the next generation, bringing about the existence of clans wielding these powers, and eventually small plots of territories, many groups, lands and clans coming together to form the elemental nations and hidden villages of today. Naruto just sat there, dumbstruck. The legend of the Rakuto Sennin had been one of the few things that he had managed to get around to reading in the last 2 weeks. It was said that the man was the founder of the ninja world, but he had been a myth for so long. To hear from the words of one of the most powerful beings in existence that he had personally taught the man who was acclaimed as the strongest shinobi to ever live wasn't something that he could reasonably express disbelief in. The Kyuubi had no real reason to live. So what you're saying then is, he took a few seconds to come up with the right words in his head, is that I definitely shouldn't get on your bad side. Oh, absolutely. The Kitsune demon sneered, going for the dramatic effect. We 9 Bijuu gave him a single task at the end of all our training. With all the knowledge and power that we taught and granted him, he was able to use a technique that manipulated gravity. Pulling together debris from outer space and pulling up most of the mountains in Lightning Country, he managed to create the moon. The Kitsune couldn't help it, he let out a chuckle that broke out into a full-blown laugh. Naruto just sat there dazed all the while, not paying attention, his mind having shut down and trying to comprehend the sheer amount of power that would have been required to create the moon. The Kitsune, seeing that Naruto had since lost all conscious thought, pushed the young Jinchuriki out of his mindscape, letting him sleep without a fit. 1 year later, 1 year had passed since Naruto had started living at training ground number 46, and he had recently celebrated his 6th birthday. For the first time in his life, he had no reason to fear the mobs, partly because of the layers of security seals on the area, partly because of Itachi's and Ibisu's reports that people had assumed he had either died or ran away from Konoha. With only 5 people knowing of his location, Naruto having asked Itachi to ask the Hokage to tell the ramen stand owner and his daughter of his ultimate fate, people simply couldn't come after him. His birthday had been a fairly quiet affair, Itachi gifting him with a wooden ninjato resembling the weapons the Anbu used, having noted that he would soon show him the basics of Kenjutsu, and Ibisu, giving him a couple of books on the lives of the 4 Hokages. The Sandaime had been unable to visit for his birthday, considering it was the same day as the Kyuubi festival, though he had been unable to visit for the past 2 years, at that, but he had sent along several dozen ramen packets. Ever since his 5th, he had been training to his limits every day. He had put on 10 kilograms over the past year, the result being a growth spurt bringing him up to 4'2", his color gaining some tone, his skin no longer wrapped around his ribs, and his hair gaining its unkissed color after being bleached for so long. The life had truly returned to his cerulean eyes, and it brought hidden delight to the 2 men that he had taken to calling his Nai-sans, to their undying embarrassment, to see him grow like it had. Itachi had discreetly taken him out of the grounds once to go see a seal master that he trusted and had a gravity seal applied to Naruto. The seal started out at 1.1x the normal rate of gravity and would slowly increase over time as his body got used to it, with his muscles and bones strengthening to withstand it. A normal person wouldn't ever be able to go beyond 4x in their natural lifetime, but Itachi estimated that Naruto could push upwards of 8x. Additionally, Itachi had moved beyond simple exercises into more elaborate training sessions. Ibisu had gone through most of the history material he had wanted to teach Naruto, the process sped up thanks to the wonders of Kage Bunshin. Because of Naruto's age, he decided to hold off some of the more complicated manners of shinobi, such as the politics of the hidden village, and instead began to teach him more general material, such as a basic understanding of the maths and sciences, as well as social interactions with other people at different levels. This, he assured Naruto, would be important if he ever became a shinobi. He had on more than one occasion ranted about 2 opposing ninja fighting straight out when one could have simply trapped and assassinated the other beforehand. Finally, with the gain in height and weight, as well as his expending vast amounts of chakra daily before his system could overflow, Naruto's chakra flow began to stabilize, allowing Ibisu to be able to get somewhere with his chakra control. He had recently mastered tree climbing, which was an arduous process. Ibisu hadn't allowed him to consider the exercise as a whole mastered until he could engage his black-clad sensei in a mock fight for half an hour, while jumping back and forth from tree to tree, using their surfaces as a fighting arena, and not falling once. Unlike his 2 human senseis, however, the Kyuubi had stayed fairly impersonal in his attitude towards Naruto, not really demeaning him, aside from the constant use of gaki, but more seemingly treating him as an uncommanded servant of sorts. The fox had, at his own request, changed Naruto's mindscape to resemble that of a fox den, and the sealed to 9 tail rings, 1 for each tail, something to which the Jinchuriki readily gave permission for, easily understanding why the Kitsune wouldn't want to live in the cage and sewers. Naruto didn't complain about the Kyuubi's attitude, however, the tales the Kitsune regaled him with of his own clan in the world of Makai intrigued him, and he understood quite well that he was possibly the only human living who would know some of the stuff the Kyuubi told him about. He also learned about much of the rest of Makai and the norms of demon society. To be truthful, while it still hurt to remember past incidents of people hurling various insults at him, the scars left by the word demon had since faded thanks to his understanding of what exactly made a demon. While he understood people meant to use the term to demean him, he was no longer mollified by it, since in his own odd way, he had found the concept of a demon as comparable with a human, and the indifference of the single demon he had come into contact with was far better than the cruelty inflicted by the vast majority of humans he had met. In the meantime, Naruto had time and again thought to ask Kyuubi about his reasons as to why he attacked Konoha, but each time refrained from doing so. He had enough tact not to ask. The Kitsune demon probably had his reasons, otherwise he would have told Naruto soon after their second meeting without needing to be asked. Naruto had his suspicions about whether or not Itachi and Sarutobi knew the real truth, considering how they were letting the Kyuubi teach him. He brushed it up to a matter of his age and hoped that the fox, even if he knew the technical difference, he still had a hard time not thinking of him as a fox, would eventually reveal things in time. Itachi was nervous. It wasn't because he was fighting off several skilled enemies or having large amounts of paperwork to fill out in his role as an Anbu captain, even with cage bunshin at his disposal. No, he was anguished because with rising security problems and border conflicts with Ta no Kuni and the recently formed Itagakure, as well as the alliance between Konohagakure and Sunagakure running into problems thanks to the foolish daimyo of Kei's no Kuni, the Hokage had recently ordered him to live at the Anbu HQ on a permanent basis. This was so he could focus more on his regular duties and to have him in the village proper in case of an attack. While he could deal with reducing his training time with Naruto, he didn't want to leave somebody who had begun to feel like a second Itato to him to live on his own again. What really galled him, however, was having to admit to himself that Naruto was perfectly capable of living independently, despite being only 6. Fine, he could deal with that. But what he couldn't deal with was the possibility of Naruto's reaction being negative. He had practically spoiled Sasuke rotten when his blood brother was born, and Sasuke had returned the favor by both worshipping him and at the same time seeing Itachi as something he had to surpass so he could emerge from the shadow of the Uchiha prodigy. He was perfectly fine with that, even he realized that others would surpass him, but he would not make it easy for anyone to do so. But Sasuke didn't have the same values as he and Naruto possessed, those of hard work and the will to succeed, and he didn't want to screw up Naruto by disrupting the fine equilibrium of his life. But it had to be done, so he would say it and get over with. Still, it was difficult when he had to approach Naruto about it. "Naruto, I need to talk to you about something." As soon as the words left his mouth, he was mentally hitting himself for them, but he kept his stoic poker face on all the time. To his own credit, Naruto could immediately tell something was up but allowed Itachi to finish what he had come to say. "The Hokage has ordered me to relocate my living space back to the Anbu headquarters. Even a few months ago, while still emotionally vulnerable, Naruto might have been kicking and screaming over Itachi no longer living with him. Now, however, he took a few seconds and thought over the exact nature of Itachi's words. While Itachi had said that he was no longer living with Naruto, he never said anything about not training him. But Itachi Nyasan, he never said anything about you not training me anymore, did he? Itachi allowed a small smile, contrary to his stoic nature. Truly his Itato was growing up finely, already being able to look behind the words in some small measure. Yes, that is correct. As for my reasons, in his teachings, has Ibisu kept you up to date on any very recent happenings in Fire Country? A shake of the head indicated no. Well then, there are two things that are going on that are unstabilizing political relations, and so Anbu is taking precautionary measures by strengthening security and increasing border patrols. I am an Anbu captain, and while the Hokage's orders to train you are still in effect, my time with you must be cut down to dedicate towards my regular Anbu duties. Furthermore, the Hokage hasn't ruled out the possibility of a direct invasion or infiltration of Konoha proper, hence I am needed to stay there in the case of an attack. While I enjoy living here, the half hour it takes to go between here and Konoha at my top speed is 25 minutes too late for an emergency response." Naruto could indeed accept that. However, much like all 6-year-old children, and especially one who carries a 1,000-year-old kitsune-tailed demon in his head, he would get out as much as he could from the situation, so he slumped his shoulder and allowed his head to fall, looking down at the ground. Unfortunately for him, he was facing an Anbu captain, trained in all manners of deception, who knew very well what he was doing. Nevertheless, Itachi played along as a last solace. Now, don't do that. Tell you what. Pick up the mood and get onto your exercises, and I'll go pick up for some ramen for dinner tonight, for Michiraku. That picked up Naruto's mood immediately, who with a short yada hopped off to the small lake, intent on furthering his ability to stay on top of water's surface. The day was a windy cool one, in comparison to the usually calm, warm days that summer in Fire Country had to offer. As a result, the water was more turbulent than usual, so Naruto had a difficult time at first, his feet falling underneath the surface twice before he managed to right himself and stay on top. Itachi merely chuckled to himself as the sun-kissed lad sat down and started doing push-ups on the water, hand occasionally dipping into the cool lake. Moments like these, he thought, were at least worth the hardships that life brought all of them. The mask-clad Anbu captain refrained from letting out a sigh as he walked over to Ichiraku Ramen after having met with the Hokage, along with Ibisu. The old man had been pleased with his report on Naruto's progress, but things were coming to a standstill. What were they to do with Naruto? Between him, Ibisu and the Kyuubi, he had proven himself to already be beyond the level of most academy graduates, sans for his actual physique, hard worker or not, a 6-year-old simply didn't have the same physical strength as a 12-year-old would. Thanks to a very demanding training schedule and the wonders of Kage Bunshin and Kyuubi's healing yokai, as well as shaving off some of the more unnecessary parts of the academic material, Itachi estimated him as already being a mid-level genin, and with another year, he would definitely be approaching low jonin levels. By the time he was 8, he would definitely be skilled enough to be a member of Anbu. But that was what troubled them all. Should they let Naruto continue to progress and become a ninja early, or allow him some semblance of a normal childhood? Itachi had nipped the argument of giving him a childhood in the bud fairly quickly, simply by pointing out that Naruto never had a real childhood, he never would have a normal childhood, and the past year so far was his childhood. Another 2 to 3 years of training would be the only childhood that Naruto could possibly have, and he had been sure to drive that argument home with the Sandaime. Finally, he didn't really think Naruto could make it on a normal 3-man genin team, his sponge-like habits in terms of learning and the side effects of Kage Bunshin practically demanded a private trainer to keep up with his training pace. So absorbed in his thoughts he was, Itachi didn't even register his unconscious movements as he threw aside the curtains that barred the full fury of the midday sun from the inside of Ichiraku Ramen. As such, when a voice interrupted his thoughts, he was completely unprepared for what he saw. "Excuse me, Anbu-san, what can I get you?" The originator of the voice was a pretty young girl with long, light brown hair, 2 bangs curving out from her forehead forming a widow's peak. A white bandana was tied behind her head to keep her hair together, and she wore a white robe apron hybrid, the color presumably to hide the flour that stained it all over. Itachi idly identified her as the 12-year-old Ayame Ichiraku, daughter of Tuchi Ichiraku, the owner of the stand. So engrossed in marveling over her Itachi was that he was again brought out of a daze by a flustered AM who had coughed lightly but made it distinct enough to once more obtain his attention. Itachi had the decency to look apologetic before making to order, my apologies, Ichiraku-san. I would like for takeout 3 orders each of chicken, beef, and miso. AM let out a low whistle at the size of the order, acknowledging his request before turning around and preparing 9 bowls of ramen. Given that Itachi was the only customer in the shop, she decided to make small talk with him to pass the time. 9 orders, eh? Can't say I get many Anbu here this time of day, they usually prefer to come in either early or late at night. I suppose it's understandable, since they like to keep secret while out in public. The conversation was one-sided, but she continued on in hopes of getting a response out of him. I suppose you're either an Akimichi or no one considering the size of your order. Actually, Itachi drawled, snapping out of the minor hypnosis cast by the soft and gentle tones of his fellow conversationalist's voice. This order is just for 2 of us, I'm an Uchiha, and my friend is a little maelstrom of chaos. He punctuated his words by taking off his mask to reveal the trademark onyx eyes and black hair of the Uchiha head family. He wasn't on duty so he wasn't required to keep his mask on. AM quickly recognized the maelstrom reference and spun around to interrogate him. She quickly dropped her spatula in shock at seeing the heir to the Uchiha clan in her family's ramen shop. Realizing her actions, she blushed and squawked at the same time and scurried to throw the now contaminated spatula into the sink and obtain a replacement. Turning to Itachi, she began to apologize, only to be cut off by the Uchiha prodigy. No need to apologize there, and please, no formalities. Just call me Itachi. AM took heed to his request. Alright then, Itachi, but can I ask how Naruto is doing? I haven't seen him in nearly a year. The Hokage has been kind enough to provide us with updates from time to time, but he hasn't sent us any of his handlers or mentors I guess. Is he being too much of a handful for you? Does he still devour ramen at an unprecedented pace and eat with the manners of a pig? She excitedly rushed out while preparing the ramen. Itachi nearly sweat-dropped at the sudden shift from a shy, timid girl to a bubbly, upbeat girl. He was just glad that she wasn't descended from the Haruno clan, of which he had recently learned had a large family history of schizophrenia and bipolar personalities, rivaling some of the madness that was inherent in the Uchiha clan's own history. He made an involuntary shiver that was missed by the ramen waitress as he remembered his talk with the Kyuubi a year past, when the 9-tailed fox had commented on how a sinister quality of the Uchiha seemed to be less present in him than usual. Itachi idly began to wonder if this was related to the insanity that seemed to be prevalent amongst the shinobi and police forces. Then minutes later, Itachi walked out of the ramen stand with his weasel mask on once more, toting a large bag of ramen in his left hand. He suddenly froze as a thought occurred to him. Kami, I hope Naruto doesn't kill me when he comes back if he sees me and am having as pleasant and relaxed a conversation as that again. Ibisu's sunglasses were off. Ibisu never took his sunglasses off in public, so they only came off when he retired to his home for the night, losing them in a fight or from shock. The circumstance in this case was the latter of the trio. It had come from a mock spar with Naruto while fighting on water to help the latter get used to movement on water. During the spar, Naruto had used a quick henge to increase his height and the length of his arms to better counter the advantage Ibisu had in his much longer reach. Ibisu had in the flicker of a half-second decided to hit Naruto square on the chest, dispel the henge, and then lecture Naruto on the properties of the henge, namely, that it created an illusion and didn't actually change the physical qualities of the user. That didn't happen, however. True, Ibisu did manage to sock Naruto on the chest and send him sprawling across the water onto solid ground. What didn't occur was the henge disappearing. While Ibisu was still gawking at the scene, his glasses floating on the water underneath his feet, Naruto groaned as he picked himself up, brushing the grass off his shinobi pants. Nah, Ibisu Nyasan, did you have to hit so hard? Then Naruto, Ibisu stammered, Naruto-kun, I need to check something for a second. Naruto complied with the request, even if he found it odd, as Ibisu walked over and grabbed his arms. He slid his fingers all the way from the shoulder to the hand, still not quite believing it. Bending his knees, he prodded the younger's feet and thighs, mumbling all the time, can't be possible, a true physical transformation could be a bloodline. Not much information on the Uzumaki clan, they originated from Whirlpool, which was destroyed a decade ago, or possible the Kyuubi's power kitsunes are renowned for their transformation powers. Okage-sama might know, interesting indeed. All the while, Naruto tried to interrupt Ibisu's train of thought until he heard the phrases bloodline and Kyuubi's power and promptly shut up, leaving the black-clothed man to his ramblings. Ibisu paused as he brought up his right index and middle finger to push his glasses back up onto his nose, only to realize the lack of glasses to sustain his habit. Turning around, he grabbed his floating glasses out of the water, used his shirt to dry them off, then put them back on. Turning back to face Naruto, he continued, Naruto-kun, do you know exactly what a henge does? Naruto blinked, surprised at the question. Yeah. It basically allows you to transform into something else. He was confused at Ibisu's asking of such a basic academic question. Ibisu just sighed. Leave it to Naruto to completely skim over the most important function of a given jutsu in his studies. You are half correct there, Naruto-kun. The henge is supposed to give off the illusion of a transformation. Seeing the slightly confused look on Naruto's face once he began to piece together the conflict between a proper henge and his usage of it, Ibisu continued, the henge is in a sense more genjutsu than ninjutsu, as you do not actually physically change form. Instead, you give off the impression of being whatever you changed into to your opponent, and the only way to dispel that illusion is movement, sending out a chakra pulse or physical contact when the person using the henge. Because dispelling an opponent's henge doesn't follow the exact same methods as one normally would do to dispel a genjutsu, that is why the henge is categorized as a ninjutsu. By this time, the black-clad man was pacing back and forth, causing a minor cloud of dust to form underneath his sandals. You, on the other hand, defy that completely. When you used what you thought was the henge, you actually increased your height and your arms did in fact become longer. The why to that is something I am not 100% sure about. The Sandaime professes to having no knowledge of who your parents were, so I doubt that it is an effect of Ikeke Genkai. He then stopped and peered closely at Naruto, who was standing shocked still at the news that he had effectively bastardized a very basic jutsu with interesting results. It occurs to me, however, that the lore that surrounds kitsune demons suggests that they are masters of illusions and transformations. You do not have any real proficiency for genjutsus, but that seems to be because of your poor chakra control, rather than any lack of chakra control. Hence, I am assuming that your ability to physically change form is a result of the kitsune lore being sealed into your navel. Having completely laid out all the possibilities he could think of and dissecting the only two probable possibilities, he concluded, you speak to the Kyuubi from time to time, I believe. A frown crossed his face at this. The Sandaime Hokage wasn't willing to tell him what exactly the reason behind the Kyuubi attack was, but only said that it wasn't the Kyuubi's own fault. While he trusted Sarutobi, it was still a bit hard to get over his own natural fear of a being of such immense power. When you talk next time, please find out what you can. Dumbfounded, Naruto just nodded, ensuring that he would get to the bottom of this newfound ability. Of course, Gaki, the Kyuubi said in response to Naruto's questioning about his ability to physically transform. You did not think that those whisker marks that adorn your cheeks and regenerative powers were the only things my presence would grant you, did you? I took a look at what your mentor said, and he was correct on his theory. Naruto shrugged nonchalantly. To be truthful, he had never really thought about it. Well, I can accept that being the case. But now that you mention it, why exactly does all this occur, and what other surprises will I be getting in the future? The giant demon, who was currently laying down at the time, got up and stretched his rear legs. To answer your first question, your chakra has, in a sense, begun to imitate my yokai over the years. The most noticeable point is regeneration. While not nearly as strong as my yokai in that manner, your chakra alone will be able to regenerate cuts, bruises, and shallow wounds and very small fractures, and it will get stronger in that effect in the future. At the same time, each demon clan has individual traits to their yokai. The kitsunes obviously had an inherent strength at illusions, and so again your chakra tries to imitate this. The Nekomata clan has unparalleled control over fire, and so forth. As for what other traits you might gain, Gaki, and here the kitsune paused, I really don't know. Seeing Naruto's jaw drop, the demon quickly cut him off before he could begin. I do not know because I believe I am the first kitsune to have been sealed into an engine. Looking closely, Naruto swore he could see a slight red tinge cross the Nine-Tailed's already crimson face. At the least, I do not recall any kitsune crossing over from Makai in the last 200 years. There is another aspect to your situation, however, I have 9 tails of power. No tails that get sealed only really give off maybe a physical trait to their vessel, a minor boost in chakra, and minor regenerative powers. With the tailed beasts, they provide more yokai to their hosts, therefore the effects of their yokai becomes more pronounced, and more so as the number of tails increases. The fox made a motion that seemed akin to a shrug. The Hachibi was sealed about 25 years ago for the first time, but I only met his vessel in his early childhood, and the only characteristics that had begun to emerge at the time were great physical strength and a near invulnerability to lightning. The Shichibi was first sealed about 200 years ago, but every time it was freed it has been quickly resealed, causing a drain on her power, and I have not gotten around to finding her or her current vessel. The Rakubi tends to stay in Makai, and by the time you get to the Gobi and under, they simply do not have as much raw strength. The fox leaned in close, pushing out his front legs as he stretched out his spine, tails pointing rigidly upwards. You did not actually get those whisker-like marks the moment I was sealed into you. Rather, they replaced your regular skin tissue on your cheeks over time, and my guess is that they will probably deepen over time. The only other physical trait you might gain are your pupils turning into slits. Your personality might shift a bit to being somewhat of a prankster, as we kitsunes love our tricks, although I can already tell you are at least decently clever, that also includes a carefree nature. The Nine-Tails paused in a slight hesitation before continuing. You know though, you are not actually completely human. Naruto flinched at that. While some of the psychological scars of the past had since faded away, it still did pain him a few times to think of himself as inhuman. Yet, the kitsune had broken the news relatively lightly, detailing several effects as a result of the seal. After learning how his chakra was beginning to imitate the demon's yokai, he wasn't too shocked. Still, he needed more clarification. What do you mean by that, though? Kyuubi looked slightly annoyed. I mean exactly what I meant, Gaki. I just told you that all that yokai flowing through your body since your day of birth caused some changes to your body. Oh, calm down. The amount of yokai that goes through your body at any one time is too minimal, combined with the absorption process, you will be at the most 1/8 demon fox, so your human side will still be dominant. Was all Naruto had to say in response, satisfied that he would still be mostly human and not allow ignorant bigots to actually be vindicated, although thinking about it, he wasn't wholly uncomfortable with the whole idea. Deciding to mull it over later, he requested a leave, considering the chat as the lecture of the night. 1 year later, the heavy, frantic knock rang off the mahogany door that linked the Hokage's personal office to the rest of the Hokage tower. The 4 Anbu, one in each corner, tensed slightly in case of a possible threat and failed to relax when Sarutobi issued a come into the knocker. He was surprised to see an Itachi Uchiha enter with emotion on his face, in particular worry and fear. Itachi Uchiha never looked worried or feared. Sarutobi raised an eyebrow at this apocalyptical omen, but before he could ask what was wrong, Itachi rushed out the words he wanted to say, Hokage-sama, I have an update on the Omegakure conflict. The Sandaime narrowed his eyes. A few weeks ago, info from Jiraiya's spy network came in on Omegakure. Ruled by Hanzo the Salamander for over 2 decades, it was the most isolated country in the elemental nations, despite being the geographical center of the continent. Knowledge of the going-ons in AIM simply did not come in or out, so it had been a surprise to hear that Omegakure was in a civil war. Obviously, any new information other than there being a civil war was something that was justifiable by barging into the Hokage's personal office. But Sarutobi knew that Itachi was talking about the aim to throw off the Anbu in his office. In reality, the Uchiha captain shouldn't have garnered any new information pertaining to the situation with Hanzo's domain, as he was supposed to be staying in Konoha for a week to prep his squad for a month-long mission up north, therefore, he was using the AIM situation as a cover. Having sensed the deception, he motioned to his subordinates to temporarily leave the office. Putting up a privacy jutsu to block off all sound and vibrations from leaving the room, he stared at Itachi, his look telling the young prodigy to start talking. Itachi took the prompt and started talking, "Forgive me for deceiving you, Hokage-sama, but this is of a matter greater than the Omegakure conflict." Seeing that his leader had already figured as much, he continued talking on, "It's about the Uchiha clan, Hokage-sama. From the information I have gathered, my father Fugaku and the clan elders plan to overthrow the Hokage." That only elicited a sigh from the third Hokage. He had suspected that something was going on with the Uchiha clan ever since a year ago. It had begun with a few inconsistencies had begun to show up in the police department management. Since then, the number of Uchiha ninja out on missions had begun to dwindle, with those in Konoha either staying within the city walls entirely or being sent out only on short minor missions or temporary patrols. Fugaku, the clan head himself, had requested that Itachi return from his undercover mission, a request Sarutobi was forced to grant due to political pressure. Itachi was one of Sarutobi's most trusted retainers, but had consistently deceived the Uchiha clan into believing he was an Uchiha first, a citizen of Konoha second, an attitude that was unfortunately prevalent in the Uchiha clan. Fortunately, since Itachi's return, he had been drawn into the more internal affairs of the clan, something that boded well for Sarutobi, who desperately needed a mole to find out more about what was happening with the Uchiha. Itachi continued, "From the information I have gathered in the past week, currently they plan on smuggling in large amounts of explosive tags over the next 2 years and recruiting all able-bodied Uchiha above the age of 12 and training them on the various security protocols the Leaf has in place to bypass them." The Hokage paled at this news. The Uchiha clan had over 300 people, and while a good majority of them were civilians, elderly or children, there were still at least 100 shinobi in the force and another 100 policemen. Additionally, while the Konoha ninja forces dwarfed what the Uchiha had to offer, they could always strike when most higher-ranked ninja were out of Konoha. With Itachi supposedly on their side, they could deal with the remaining Anbu and Jonin, and the Hokage, no matter how powerful he was, would be vulnerable. Sarutobi mulled over the situation, then came to the conclusion. He would try to make peace overtures with Fugaku. If that failed, then he would have to go for a more drastic maneuver. Before that occurred, however, he needed more information. Very well. For now, please find as much information as you can on any illicit dealings within your clan. Make recordings of any proof that you find, but do your best to make it seem you're on their side. Itachi's lip curled down in a menacing scowl, and Sarutobi knew that there was something else that he had found. The white-cloaked man beat him to the punch, however. "In fact, I have. On no less than 6 occasions the Uchiha clan has hired assassins, all for the same target. One Uzumaki Naruto." The monkey man clenched his hands together and relaxed his chin on his finger joints, distraught from the news. "I see. Under what reasoning do they feel they need to send assassins after our young prodigy here? And do you have any damning evidence, or was it only hearsay at your meeting?" Although he had an idea of what the motivation was, he wanted to be positive instead of making an estimate at the Uchiha clan's reasons. "They haven't been targeting Naruto because he's the demon, if that is what you are thinking, Hokage-sama." Itachi sighed, another thing he rarely did. In fact, if it were just news of the coup d'etat plan, he would have been calm, but it was mainly the attempted assassinations of Naruto, somebody that he indeed had begun to consider his Itato that had his emotions volatile. AM was another concern. In the last year since he had first met her at Ichiraku Ramen, he had gone back constantly on his own free time and often talked to her. Although they weren't exactly boyfriend-girlfriend, they were getting close, and he didn't like to think of the hellish life a commoner would live under the reign of the Uchiha. Rather, they see the sheer amount of power that he wields as a threat to their own power, with enough potential to surpass even me. He said that with disgust. Between keeping Naruto from being adopted and trying to assassinate him, he was beginning to despise the clan. He and Shisui were the only ones that tried to test their limits and then surpass it, while the rest of the clan wallowed in their own arrogance and preemptively tried to put down anything that had a possibility of overwhelming them. He nearly shuddered, thinking of what Naruto might have been like if it were not for the combination of factors that allowed him to finally escape into the thralls of training ground number 46. He might have ended up as a loudmouth dead last who wore semi-bright orange jumpsuits while going around shouting out nonsensical phrases like Dadabeo. There was more to what he had to report, however, and Itachi didn't find it pretty. "Unfortunately, all I have is hearsay." The exact line one of the elders said during the meeting was, "I can't believe that demon Brad escaped our last 6 assassins." Fortunately, they do not yet have any idea as to where he has been during the last 2 years, which has confounded them, despite having 2 people working full-time looking for his whereabouts. A frown finally crossed his face. This last piece he definitely didn't like. Sadly, I have grounds to believe that the Hyuga clan may have cooperated with one of the attempts. That caught the Hokage's attention. Having heard the Uchiha clan's motivations, he guessed that it was the same for the Hyuga clan, but it would be a lot more difficult for it to ascertain the identities of the perpetrators amongst the Hyuga. Meanwhile, the ones he already suspected, the clan elders and Hyuga Hiashi, who had called for the boy's execution at his birth, would be difficult to dig up any incriminating dirt on. He sighed. What a troublesome job this is becoming. Corruption so rooted in some of the clans that they are constantly trying to assassinate a civilian boy simply because he might threaten the status quo. Pushing his reading glasses up on his nose, he ordered Itachi, "You're dismissed, Captain." "Hi," responded the weasel-masked Anbu, who turned around and left the office. The Hokage got up out of his chair and disabled the privacy jutsu surrounding the office. With that gone, he went over to a storage cabinet and obtained a new quill pen and a blank scroll. Setting both of them down on his desk, he got to writing a letter addressed to one of his wayward former students before summoning a monkey summon to deliver it by sending it off to the toads in the realm all the summons resided in. Ibisu Nyasan," came the petulant whine from the blonde Jinchuriki. "Yes, what is it, Naruto-kun?" Ibisu asked, hoping for a good question. After all, some of the questions Naruto had when it came to training had often forced him to think them over before answering, a slight embarrassment resulting from not completely knowing the answer, a slight tinge of pleasure from becoming more knowledgeable. When doing hand seals for a jutsu, is there any way to skip a hand seal for a jutsu? Now that was an excellent question, and it was something that Ibisu had indeed put a bit of research into in the past. Well, Naruto-kun, it is in fact possible to skip a hand seal in a seal sequence for a jutsu. With enough practice, you could even pull a jutsu without once using any hand seals whatsoever. Seeing the look of awe crossing the wide-eyed boy, he continued. "Allow me to elaborate. When you do your Kage Bunshin, is there ever a distinct feel to your chakra?" Naruto thought it over, then put his hands in a cross shape, creating a pair of Kage Bunshins, before dissipating them, leaving nothing behind but for a whiff of smoke. "Now that you mention it, there is. It feels somewhat like a burst of chakra that travels up from my feet up my body before exiting out the top of my hand." Ibisu allowed a smile and then nodded. "Correct. When you perform hand seals, each hand seal causes a small manipulation to your flow of chakra, and the series of manipulations is what makes up a jutsu. If you can internally force this manipulation, then you don't have to do its opposing hand seal. The Kage Bunshin will actually be one of the easier techniques that you know to do sealess, simply because it has only one seal and you have had lots of practice with it. Other jutsus are a lot tougher. For example, the Suiton. Shuriken no Jutsu has 42 hand seals to it, but you know what? If you can skip even 6 of those hand seals, you can finish it a half second quicker than somebody going through the full 42 hand seals. If you can skip even one hand seal, you can completely negate the copying ability of the Uchiha clan Sharingan. But let me give you another example. Take your basic Kawarimi. Most people never really think about how it works, they just use it. Your hand seals don't actually replace you, rather, they create a chakra string, which you then attach to a nearby object. Using the properties of the chakra string, you switch the ends of the chakra string. The physics of how it is done does not really matter that much, but the important part is the chakra strings. While most rely on hand seals to make chakra strings, they can actually manually be created. Suna is famous for its puppeteers, who use 10 chakra strings, one for each finger, to manipulate a puppet. Then, if your opponents do not see you do the hand seals for Kawarimi, they won't be expecting to hit a block of wood. Ibisu waited a few minutes for Naruto to take in all this new strategic information, only to nearly face a fault when the latter cheekily started off with Sugoi. "Well, in any case, Naruto-kun, I highly recommend you never try to experiment with skipping hand seals with your own physical body. As you might imagine, a single error in manual chakra manipulation can backfire. The potential is there for any backlash to fry your chakra system, crippling you from being a ninja even with regenerative powers, as well as the possibility of death. Always use a Kage Bunshin to experiment." With his warning said, he walked over to his pack, grabbing some scrolls, ready to start the next lesson of the day. A few weeks after Ibisu had impressed on Naruto the importance of not using his physical body for chakra experimentation, the Kyuubi had an odd proposal for Naruto. When Naruto had entered his mindscape, he was expecting another impromptu discussion on the Kitsune clan or the Bijuas, but what he hadn't expected was for the 9 tails to be sitting on his haunches, tails swishing about, with a contemplative look on his face. It was apparent that he knew Naruto was there, but other than that, he seemed to be off in his own little world. As the minutes passed, Naruto's patience evaporated. Fed up as he was, however, he still managed a calm tone as he asked, "Kyuubi Dono, is something wrong?" To his credit, the past year of training helped as he jumped back as opposed to stumbling when the Kyuubi lunged his neck at him, jaw snapping in a vile hiss. The jailer put his hands up in a submissive gesture, unsure as to what was bothering his prisoner, but was sure that he would soon find out. Quiet, Gaki. I am trying to think here. In truth, the Kyuubi had already decided what he was about to do next, but was currently mulling over the ramifications it could have for the future. Deciding to think it over later while he didn't have company present, he turned his attention to his vessel. I have a request to make of you, Gaki. Naruto swallowed a deep gulp, a lump forming in his throat. The nine-tailed kitsune demon wasn't exactly a friend and most definitely was not a Nyasan, but he was still an odd sort of acquaintance that had at least been helping him out, so if the request was reasonable, he would fulfill it to the best of his abilities. Truth be told, he would do it anyways regardless of their camaraderie or not. The past year had done much for his psyche, and Naruto wanted to live now, and he most definitely wanted to live past his 14th birthday as well. What would you have me do, Kyuubi Dono? He managed to force out through his fear of a possibly angry Kyuubi. Whatever doubts the Vulpine demon had, they were vanquished as he restrained a smirk at how utterly whipped his container was. While it was an embarrassment to have been sealed away in a newborn infant, especially the son of the one whom sealed him, he had plotted to salvage the most out of the situation, and at this pace it looked like his plans would come to fruition without a hitch. For now, he would further an aspect of his scheme by influencing the Gaki's mentality. It is actually a simple request. You understand to a degree that the nature of the seals that protects your residency prevents any who have not made a proper blood sacrifice from entering this area, correct? A small nod indicated a yes. However, the seals that bar others from this area only works on humans, meaning that animals can come and go without restriction. A dumb look on Naruto's face showed his desire for the Kyuubi to get to the point. Even in my prison here, I have had a minor sense of the outside world, and the kinship I can feel with my counterpart species still holds strong. Recently, a small family of foxes has taken residence in a nearby cave. I want you to, for lack of a better term, raise them. The young blue-eyed blonde let a blink slip with a second blink moments later before he allowed himself to gape as the Kyuubi's request demand made itself clear. He tried to work up a coherent response, unfortunately, all he could come up with was a shrill nani. The Kyuubi snapped back at him, I do not literally mean to raise them as pets. Rather, I want you to watch out for them. Konoha has not treated foxes well in the last 6 years, and I have felt the local population dwindle to 1/10 of its original population. What I want you to do is watch out for their well-being. Bring them food during the drier months, or when the females are in heat, kill off any predators, increase the comfort of their den and its security. Anything you can do to promote the growth of the family and decrease the mortality rates. Letting out a sigh at the fate of his non-demonic kin in the greater Konoha area, he continued on. I will have to ask permission of you to be able to communicate with you while you are conscious on the outside, so I can direct you once you hit the den. In return, while they shouldn't run away from you because you smell like me, you will still have to channel some of my yakai to get them to accept you. Naruto nodded at that last comment, accepting the inevitability of the situation. He had found out a few months earlier that if he were to ever channel the kitsune's yakai, normally it would cause the seal to loosen, but that there was a single loophole in the seal where the Kyuubi could allow him to use a small amount of without weakening the seal at all. Kyuubi himself was originally planning to use this loophole for himself in a few years, but once he found out this secondary effect, gave Naruto the chance to try the yakai out a few times in practice, for if he ever bit off more than he could chew and needed a trump card. Now, an external observer might think that the Kyuubi would want the seal to weaken. However, the Vulpine was cautious and had examined the seal that held him many times. While he understood its inner workings and understood it for the most part, he had also realized that the seal merely gave instructions on the imprisonment of the fox and its rent conditions, while the Shinigami's power was the enforcer of these instructions. He didn't want to find out what would happen if the instructions were to disappear while he was still imprisoned in the young Naruto Uzumaki, so he erred on the side of caution and let it be. Naruto didn't know about all this, however, nor did he really think about it. All he knew was that the seal depended to a degree on his own willpower, hence, he could give the Kyuubi some degree of freedom by simply willing it and already had by allowing the fox to manipulate the manner of his cage and Naruto's own mindscape, as well as full access to his own memories. This all paled to the first thing he did for the fox, however, which was allowing the Kyuubi to pull him into his own mindscape. This allowed him to skip meditation at night, efficiently entering his mindscape as soon as he went to bed, and he trusted the kitsune not to abuse that power. Having already done this, it would be reasonable to let the fox communicate with him mentally on the outside world, and if he became annoyed or needed his thoughts to be private, he could always shut the fox out. Very well, I will allow you to communicate mind to mind with me while on the outside world. While Naruto made a hasty exit from the mindscape, his already ghost-like image fading away into a mere misty apparition, the Kyuubi bared his teeth in a cocky grin. Yes, with this latest success he would definitely get something worthwhile out of this whole fiasco of being sealed. One of the imperatives of being a ninja was to always be able to expect the unexpected, failing that, a shinobi must do their best to be able to adapt to the situation to maximize their efficiency over the task at hand. Even with that lesson ingrained in him, it was still a bit of a surprise when Naruto abruptly woke up while rolling over and found himself not sleeping in a bed with rays from the moonlight poking through his window, but rather sleeping on the hard dirt of a dark, damp cave that reeked heavily of animal. Taking a few seconds to think over what was going on, he remembered the circumstances that had led him to here, sleeping in a fox den. Finding the foxes had not been so bad, Naruto reflected. Having stretched his senses out a bit and with some instructions from Kyuubi, he easily located the cave that the family had taken over and made into a den. It was when he intruded upon their new home that things had gotten a bit out of the usual for him. Flashback. Having found the entrance to the den in the wall of a small cliff, Naruto easily understood how the place had gone uninhabited until then. Humidity from the nearby stream collected up at the bottom of the cliff and had become trapped in the cave. The year-round heat that was present thanks to Konoha's location near the geographical center of the continent added to the unsufferable heat of the cave, creating hot damp air. The only way residency in the cave could be tolerable was to consistently keep your head less than 2 feet off the ground, as the moisture tended to congregate near the top of the cave, causing droplets of water sliding down the ceiling towards the wall. At Kyuubi's insistence, Naruto crawled through the cave, trying to make a decent amount of noise so as to not startle the fox, yet not so much so as to scare them off. After crawling about 20 feet through the tunnel, a little yip followed by a growl interrupted Naruto's mental conversation with the Kyuubi as he saw a red-furred fox standing aggressively before him. The Kyuubi cut into the showdown as he communicated with Naruto. "Gaki, you will want to use my yokai here, it will allow you to temporarily speak fox." Naruto complied, though a bit odd at the jack-of-all-trades use Kyuubi's yokai was beginning to seem to have when properly applied, as well as a bit uneased over how readily the kitsune was giving him some of his yokai. He had made it bitterly clear at the beginning of his mentorship that he would almost never allow him usage of his yokai, and a thin coat of red began to shine around his body, startling the fox that stood before him. What surprised Naruto, however, even with Kyuubi's warning, was his understanding the fox's yips and growls. "Who are you? You smell like fox, yet you are human." Crude and to the point, but effective at getting its desire across for knowledge to satiate its own natural vulpine curiosity. Before it even crossed his conscious mind that he was speaking to a fox, Naruto responded in a series of grunts and growls. "Kyuubi-sama sent me." He then realized what he had just done and backed up, thinking over the last few seconds. So caught up in this revelation Naruto was that he missed the tail end of what the sentry fox said to him. Blushing at not paying attention, he spoke up, continuing his guttural speech. "I'm sorry, what was that again?" The fox was annoyed at having to repeat himself, but having seen Naruto's eyes take on a glazed look for a few seconds, he had an idea of what had been going on despite foxes being, well, more animalistic in their wanderings. Lore still managed to pass down through the ages, and the sealing of demons into human beings was one of them. As I asked, "How do you know Kyuubi-sama?" By now, however, he had an idea of what was going on, particularly given Konoha's hostility to anything fox. Naruto yipped back, "I am the vessel that he was sealed into 7 years ago." Seeing the fox look slightly more hostile than before at the news, he quickly added, "It was not my choice, and he has no chance of escape from the seal that holds him for at least another 7 years." The fox gave off something between a sigh and a snort Naruto couldn't quite tell, given that a fox's face had less flexibility to express emotions, but responded with a bit more cordiality than before. "What does Kyuubi-sama want from us?" Naruto was slightly bemused at how the fox had easily fallen in line at the mention of the Kyuubi, but quickly sought to explain why he was here. "Kyuubi-sama doesn't want anything. On the contrary, rather, as an unfortunate side of his attack on Konohagakure 7 years ago, the local fox population has sharply declined. He has picked up on this, as his vessel, he wishes for me to offer what aid I can in boosting numbers. As such, ask and I will do what I can to help the family here." The fox stayed silent for a minute, then responded, "We have 3 males and 5 females, all adults, 2 expecting a litter a little before the full moon." Naruto tried to remember the state of the moon from the night before and recalled it as being a little bit more than a sliver. "So in about 24 days." He asked as a rough estimate, going off his knowledge of a full moon being approximately 28 days give or take a negligible fraction. 24 solar cycles, the fox agreed. "It is too wet in here, so either find us another place to reside or get rid of the dampness. All my packmates refuse to leave the cave right now out of fear of other humans, and I alone cannot provide for all 8 of us. If you could, please secure some manner of prey for us. So, get rid of dampness, get food." "Can I do that, Kyuubi-sama?" Naruto prompted his inner demon. "Yes, you certainly can. However, for now, you can only get food. Come into the mindscape tonight and I shall show you a jutsu that shall solve for the problem of dampness. Kyuubi-sama says I should be capable of both." I cannot help with the moisture just yet, but I can get food. However, you need not worry about humans, though, this place is protected by seals that prevent most humans from getting in. To my knowledge, there are only 4 humans capable of entering the surrounding the area outside in about a 4-kilometer radius, Naruto said. Thinking the conversation over, he flipped over and turned his body around to crawl out. Wait. The fox yipped out, its lit eyes narrowing in what looked to be wary distrust. Naruto turned his head around. Is it simply because Kyuubi-sama asked you to help us that you do? Naruto just laid there for a minute and thought. No, it is not. Kyuubi-sama only made a request of me, not an order. Rather, here, he gained a look of frustration on his face. When he was sealed in me, the village that he was attacked had suffered losses of many sorts, and I simply was the most convenient scapegoat. My goal ever since I found out why I was hated by so many was to prevent others from suffering the same as I did. At first, it was a will only to be extended to my fellow humans, but seeing how Konoha has abused the Vulpine population, I cannot stand for that either. Finishing his monologuing, he concluded, if that is all, then I believe I am done here. With no response, he crawled back out of the cave, leaving a thoughtful fox behind. Then flashback. After that, he had gone out for the hunt, putting his instincts, senses and shinobi skills to use. Flashback. The low breeze whistled through the trees, but the prey paid no attention as a brown rabbit nibbled on the grass. After all, it was often windy, and during this time of the year, when the heat began to pick up and the air became heavy with moisture, the pickings were good. Besides, its main natural predator, foxes, had not been seen in years, and over time the rabbit's instincts had dulled. Finally, it was in an out-of-the-way location far from any center of humans, so it had no need to fear the possibility of being hunted by them either. Hence when a 4-sided shuriken flew through the air silently, the rabbit never had a chance to know it was dead as the metal star pierced its throat, its carotid artery bleeding out as its lifeblood left its body. A young golden-haired boy who had made sure to stay downwind of the summer breeze to avoid his scent being given away and put his hand over the bleeding to keep the meat of the rabbit fresh. It was then that it struck Naruto that this was the first time that he had killed anything bigger than the common flyer of fish. As if a plug had been pulled on his mind, a torrent of emotions flooded through him all at once in a rush. At first, he was horrified. He had just killed a rabbit, a living, breathing mammal, in cold blood, and for what? Food. He could always have just gotten ramen or vegetables from the log cabin. Just as he was about to break down crying in memory of the poor innocent creature he had just taken the life of, the more rational part of his brain began to hold back the waves of confusion. That was all very well for him, but what of the foxes? They needed food now, and they were far more carnivorous in their eating habits than humans were. He couldn't very well blame evolution for that, now could he? Additionally, he had long since learned that if he was to ever become a shinobi, he needed to be prepared to kill in what was essentially a dog-eat-dog world, particularly if he wished to fulfill his goal of preventing others from living what life had been like for him before that fateful day 2 years ago. Still, it was with a heavy heart that Naruto walked away from the clearing, but eventually the adrenaline wore off and his blood vessels eased as he came to an abrupt realization. He might not like killing, but for every necessary kill he made, it was a kill somebody else did not have to make. If somebody enjoyed killing, then he or she would very likely not maintain a code of morals for very long. It was with a shrill bark that Naruto began to laugh. Jinchuriki was the term that he had been told about 2 years ago. The power of human sacrifice, they called a person like him. Little did they know that he would live up to the name in more ways than one, right now as he killed a rabbit in preparation for the real deal, as soon as he was born and hopefully so long as he lived. Then flashback. It was odd, indeed, as when Naruto had come back, rabbit in hand, and after the foxes were done feeding, they had invited him to stay. Partly it was a deterrent against any other enemies, partly because they seemed to find some comfort of the Kitsune overlord, no matter whether he was sealed or not. In the back of his head, Naruto was beginning to suspect said Kitsune of being up to something with all his actions. Sure, he knew the demon would be a manipulative one with his own motives, but this was the first he had thought about it, and he couldn't help but wonder just what the Kyuubi had in store for him if this was only the beginning of what would happen in the 7 years to come still. For now, he left his thoughts aside as he rolled over onto his back, the heavy smell of fox permeating the cave, which he had promptly used a futon to top it to clear the mist out of shortly after he had returned, and Kyuubi had gotten a chance to give him the hand seals to it. Even if it was a temporary solution, it still had gotten rid of a buildup of humidity weeks old. Over the next few months, while his thoughts on Kyuubi's actions only lingered at the back of his mind, he did consort with the foxes some more, sleeping many nights in the fox den, finding himself more at peace with them around than in his own room at the cabin, something which he chalked up to the Kyuubi influenced his own inner nature. While he never learned any names, this family not being one that did names, though the Kitsune demon assured him that others did, he did help them survive, occasionally bringing in a bit of raw game and keeping the cavern in top shape for when the first of the vixens gave birth to her litter of kits. Overall, Naruto began to thought, while some of his behavior seemed to be as a result of the Kyuubi being sealed inside of him, he didn't really mind. He had known that he was becoming slightly demonic for a while now, which would explain the other part of his new attitude, such as the wanton desire to be close to his non-demonic kin, and with nobody around to hurt him physically or psychologically, he had no problem in embracing this newly emerged side of him. "Boy, Gaki!" Kyuubi shouted out, particularly exuberant for once. "Come over here and sit down, I have an idea for you on how to better your chakra control." Needless to say, Naruto hurried his way over to in front of the fox, who had by this time in his nightly teachings, decreased his avatar's size from hundreds of feet tall to a little under a story to better interact with the blown every night. Even though he had grown a bit over the past 2 years, his chakra resolves had kept up the point where his growth spurt was mostly negated. Instead, it had been getting rid of large quantities before training that had been the most help. That the Kitsune had any kind of solution to increase his efficiency over utilizing his chakra was music to his ears. What is it, Kyuubi-sama?" he excitedly exclaimed as he plopped his rear on the dirt floor of the fox den. The Kyuubi tossed his vessel a vulpine grin. "If it were something I would do, I would have smacked myself with my paw for how simple of a solution it was." He waited a few seconds to build up the suspense for the young Uzumaki before continuing on. "As you know, the Shikifujin is largely based on willpower, as you already have noticed with me being able to redecorate your mindscape and talking to you while on the outside world. However, with your permission again of course, I would also be able to use my yakai to control your physical body." Here, his mouth curled up in what Naruto had long since identified as a giant fox's version of a frown. "Do not worry, I have no desire to take control of a weak ninja body such as yours." Naruto just stayed quiet at the Kitsune's words. He might be on the bad side of a somewhat abusive relationship with the nine-tailed Biju, but so far the fox had been fairly honest in its dealings, and he desired to be able to live after the Shinigami's power ran out. "Anyways, asides from taking control, I could also ideally alter your very genetic structure to give you a bloodline, as bloodlines usually come from a demonic-human relationship and the dilution of the demonic blood over several generations. However, I will not your genetics, as I would have to physically change them for every cell in your body, which is a tad bit more difficult than simple breeding." Naruto restrained a blush at the constant references to mating and breeding. While he was ignorant to the birds and bees, he still had an idea of the reproduction process having been amongst the foxes for a while. The fox continued on, ignorant of his vessel's thoughts at the moment. "That does not mean I cannot do anything, however. In basic, what my idea revolves around is to increase the number of tenketsu in your body." Seeing Naruto gape at the idea, the fox cut in before Naruto could ask any questions. That Uchiha Gaki said a human being normally has 361 tenketsu on their body, which is true. However, those who use chakra usually develop a few extra tenketsu over their lifetime, usually through the pressure of the chakra, causing the chakra coils to forcibly adapt by opening up a few new tenketsu to release more chakra from at the same time. They most often pop up on the hands, feet or around the mouth because those are the most popular areas to channel chakra from. However, new tenketsu can also result from a large overuse of chakra at once, which can cause the skin around the coils to blow up and the coils would develop upwards into the skin. Lastly, some medic nins skilled with senbons and able to see or feel the exact location of your chakra coils, such as the Hyuga clan, can forcibly cut through skin and muscle and coax tenketsu to develop. Once more the fox paused, then added, "Of course, doing that is a very delicate process and requires extreme concentration on the part of the medic." "Huh," Naruto replied as he looked down at his feet in a contemplative pose, then gave off a short hum before coming to a conclusion. So far he saw no lie in the Kitsune Lord's words, which he needed to be able to detect every time the fox neglected to swear upon his demon's honor that he was telling the truth, but that didn't mean the demon couldn't deceive him, he could still be leaving things out. Once again, he figured that the Kyuubi hadn't tried to do anything already for 2 years, even in his most vulnerable state, so there wasn't any point in distrusting him now. Still, he needed more information. Bringing his head back up to look back at his prisoner's red-slit eyes, he probed for more details. "So for you to add more tenketsu to my body on your own, I would have to temporarily hand over complete control to you?" A nod confirmed his suspicions. "What else should I know about this procedure? How exactly will you be creating them, and where will most of the new tenketsu be concentrated?" For his own part, over the past 2 years, the Kyuubi had been pleased at how readily his vessel took to instruction. Even in the face of the king of the Biju and a kami blessed being of near absolute power, the young boy had been defiant, struggling onwards every day to improve himself. It showed, too, as between his lessons in the mindscape and the effects of the cage bunshin, the giant kitsune estimated that its vessel had mentally aged 7 years in the past 2 physical years. Truly, it was a shame that Uzumaki Naruto was not born a kitsune, but the Kyuubi's own yokai had already caused his biological structure to slightly change into that of a kitsune. It was a process that would not be completed, but at least the Kyuubi could take heart in that someone who was already as able to see through deception as his container was had at least some degree of kitsune blood. I will not lie. When I take over your body, what I do will hurt. Was Naruto's simple reply as his face scrunched up in concentration. That reminds me, I understand the basic anatomy of my chakra coils and everything, but the extra length of my coils shouldn't accommodate for what I'm feeling when I focus in on the 8 gates. My reserves give off a feeling of being less tight, I guess. I think that's the only way I can really describe it. Ah, the Kyuubi growled back in its guttural tone. That is somewhat easy to explain. In the past I have told you that the 9 clans that the 9 Biju belong to all have humanoid forms adorned with features that their counterpart animal possesses, one of the most usual traits being a tail and ears for the mammals. Yet, we can also transform into our counterparts, but more specifically, mammoth-sized versions. How do you suppose that is? Naruto was confused by the question, but decided to think it over. Well, obviously it isn't a henja or an illusion, because that would never stand up to a trained ninja. If you were to be a regular-sized fox, I imagine you could compress your body, but you'd still weigh the same. The blonde paused. The answer to the kitsune's question was there, lingering at the front of his thoughts, waiting to be grabbed all the while subtly slipping through his fingertips. On the flip side, your giant fox body can't be all physical mass, so the only way I can see it happening is if it were a yokai construct. Naruto leaped up, a wild gleam shining in his eyes. That was it. Indeed you are right, young one, said the Kyuubi, offering a rare praise to his container. A demon's body is able to contain vast amounts of yokai, far more than any human is physiologically capable of. We can let out all that yokai to create out giant bodies. For example, in my earlier rampage, the only mass in my body was in the center, where my real body existed. Here he let out another low growl. Of course, with the ceiling my body lost its soul, so it disintegrated right after. A lesser demon would never be able to live free of its prison after that, because they have no body to go to when they escape, but all of us tailed Biju have enough yokai that we can create an actual physical body to inhabit as soon as we free ourselves, which is why despite many of the lower ranking Biju and the Shichibi being sealed multiple times, they still live to this day. At this point, the 9-tailed demon realized he was straying from the original topic and abruptly switched subjects. Anyways, the point is the demon equivalent of your 8 gates is capable of holding far more yokai than the gates is of your chakra. As I have mentioned before, your body will metamorph to a degree into a kitsune, so the hachimen are capable of holding more chakra without feeling a breaking point, if you will. As a result, your chakra does not overflow out into your chakra coils, meaning your chakra flow will be somewhat easier to manage. Within the next year I would say that your chakra control should improve from absolutely miserable to only below average.